Hi guys, tonight we're diving into the strange world of medieval sleep. Think two separate slumbers, straw mattresses alive with fleas, and even cozy farm animals sharing the bed before gliding forward to the powerful 1963 March on Washington. If you enjoy drifting off to calm story-rich history, please subscribe, tap the like button, and feed the algorithm. I want to hear your thoughts. Which part shocks you more? The medieval nightcap or the marchers' bold demands for justice? Drop your answer in the comments below. Dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin our gentle time travel journey together through history right now. Picture the hush that settles over a medieval village once the last glow of sunset slips behind the timbered rooftops. A single torch nailed to the church door flickers in the damp air, throwing a wavering halo across the muddy lane. Every sound is muffled, as though wrapped in wool, a distant ewe, bleeding the clap of a shutter being barred, the squeak of a wagon shaft finally stilled. Inside a thatched cottage, the day's labor peels from tired shoulders. Families huddle around embers that ooze the last heat of oak logs, sharing a thin pot of pottage, while the night like a velvet curtain drapes itself over the world. When bowls are licked clean, the hour arrives for first sleep. No one calls it that. It is simply the beginning of night. The straw mattress, a pale mound of last summer's hay stuffed into a linen sack, waits in the shadows. Mother shakes it with a practiced swing, watching motes of chaff. And yes, a few fleas drift into the glow. She knows tomorrow she will itch, but she has no better bed. Father bars the door, coughs straw dust from his lungs, and lies down beside the children. Between all the bodies, the mattress flattens into a lumpy raft, yet warmth blooms under patched blankets, stitched from old cloaks and hemp sacks. Within minutes, breathing slows. The room settles into that intimate chorus unique to families sharing one small space. A child's sudden sigh, two mismatched snores, the soft scuffle of a terrier turning circles before curling at the foot of the bed. Candles gutter out. Yet darkness is never complete. Moonlight bleeds through gaps in shutters and paints a silver stripe across dirt floors, reminding everyone that outside sleeps the same moon their great-grandparents knew. Around midnight, though they own no clocks, something curious happens. Eyelids crack open, first one person, then another, until nearly everyone is half awake. The interval between first and second sleep is so ordinary that nobody thinks to whisper, "Why are you up?" They simply rise. Father slips on a cloak, steps into clogs, and trudges to the lean-to, where the cow lowed earlier. He milks her by horn lantern, saving the warm froth to hush, an infant newly roused by hunger. Mother kneels before the hearth and feeds the embers a fistful of dry kindling, coaxing a gentle flame to warm a spoon of herb-scented broth for a grandparent who cannot settle. Somewhere outside, a neighbor mutters a brief prayer while checking his sheep against prowling wolves. The village, half dreaming, half alert, hums softly like a beehive at dusk. Scholars centuries later will call this biphasic pattern natural evidence that humanity once slept in tune with the sun. For medieval folk, it is simply practical. The waking watch catches thieves' calms, livestock, keeps fires from dying, and occasionally allows for a quiet moment of intimacy, while youngsters drift in and out of half-dreams. Parish bells sometimes ring matins in the pitch-black, summoning monks to chant psalms that echo like distant surf across frost-hardened fields. On feast eves, the gap between sleeps may host gossip dice games or a round of ale passed hand to hand. Other nights, it is given over to silent contemplation, the firelight painting halos on rough-hewn beams. After an hour or so, the household returns to bed for second sleep. Dreams now run deeper, colored by the secure knowledge that dawn tasks can wait until cockcrow. Some swear that visions granted in second sleep prove truer, as though the mind, having already dipped its toes in slumber, can now dive beneath consciousness. Whether prophetic or mundane, these dreams matter. A soldier may wake certain his patron saint warned of danger. A miller's wife might insist tomorrow's loaves must be marked with extra crosses, lest the dough refuse to rise. The night, like an indulgent parent, allows such beliefs to flourish unchecked. At first light, the rooster cleaves the hush, and a new day fractures the dark. Ashes are stirred, oats are ladled, and beds are left unmade. There is neither linen nor time to waste on tidiness. Fleas scurry back into straw awaiting nightfall. The cycle will repeat until harvest brings fresh bedding, and colder nights demand thicker caps. Yet while medieval villagers guarded their sleep against vermin drafts and wandering spirits, others centuries later would lie awake beneath gas lamps, wrestling with different specters, inequity, hope, the weight of history. Fast forward to August 27, 1963. On the eve of the March on Washington, thousands toss in church basements and bus seats. Few find even a first sleep, let alone a second. Their restlessness is not born of fleas or cold, but of anticipation. They clutch hand-lettered placards the way peasants clutched wooden crucifixes, each object a shield against the unknown dawn. This contrast that medieval peasants organized their nights around brute survival, while modern protesters willingly surrendered comfort for change, draws a bright line across centuries. Nighttime, it seems, magnifies whatever lives inside the human heart. Whether you kneel to stoke coals or rehearse a speech by flashlight, the dark invites reckoning. So as you settle into your own bed, memory foam haven, or sagging hand-me-down, remember the lineage of sleepers who preceded you. Think of the straw crackling the moonstripe on a dirt floor, the murmur of psalms drifting over fields. Recall also the sleepless pilgrims bound for Washington, reciting lines they hoped would bend the arc of the moral universe. Different centuries, different battles, yet the same fragile geography of longing mapped beneath the stars. In our next chapter, we will leave the straw-strewn cottages behind and walk toward the Lincoln Memorial, where a different kind of dream will be spoken aloud. For now, feel the soft pressure of blankets, the slow burn of embers, and the pulse of history humming beneath the hush. Close your eyes if you wish. The night remains long enough for 2 sleeps and 1,000 possibilities. Let the tide of time carry you onward. Dawn seeps into the medieval village like dye into parchment, slow and permanent. The rooster's second crow pries open eyelids that only recently surrendered to second sleep. Smoke tucks itself through the thatch vent. Children kick off scratchy blankets. Parents stretch. Feeling every knot the straw mattress failed to soften. A thin gray wedge of light slices across the dirt floor, announcing that the night's segmented truce between toil and rest is finished. Nobody expects luxury, only enough slumber to keep muscles from locking when the plow handles bite again, or the loom pedals stiffen under a foot. The day begins not with washing or breakfast, but with thanks. In an age of famine plague, and accident waking is negotiating one more day of breath. A pot of small beer left by the hearth has thickened into a faintly sweet porridge. Wooden spoons scrape every grain. Father assigns chores before the village path. Clogs with neighbors, one child must chase geese from the cabbages, another queue at the well. Mother lifts the trapdoor over the night soil pit and shovels last evening's waste toward the compost heap, holding linen across her nose, yet humming a psalm all the same. Gratitude, she knows, matters more than fragrance. For centuries, that pattern first sleep midnight, rising second sleep lingered like wood smoke in winter air. Diaries from rural Yorkshire, letters from Puritan New England, even plantation ledgers in early Virginia speak of a first nap and a morning sleep. But change stalked the edges of darkness. As hamlets fattened into towns, streets sprouted whale oil lamps and then gas lights. Merchants discovered that illuminated windows lured customers past dusk. Darkness lost its sovereignty, and time itself grew elastic. Artificial glow stretched workshops from 12 to 14 hours, while factory whistles demanded bodies alert at dawn, not halfway through it. Midnight shifted from a shared intermission to a place businesses preferred you never visit. By the mid-19th century, the very language of rest had flipped. Physicians scolded patients who woke at 1 a.m., labeling the habit insomnia rather than nature's intermission. Advice manuals and penny newspapers preached the virtue of 8 consecutive hours for maximum commercial efficiency. Midnight milkings whispered family prayers. Even quiet marital tenderness were squeezed out by timetables printed on punch cards. Bedrooms shrank from communal shelters into private sanctuaries whose silence was guarded by propriety and metronomic watch ticks. What had been ordinary became a disorder. What had been collective became solitary. Yet the body remembers better than society. Even today, millions pop awake around midnight, half certain something is wrong, when in fact, something is ancient. Some scroll, glowing phones. Some wander to the refrigerator. Others lie still counting heartbeats. Pilgrims straddling 2 eras, summoned by biology older than chimneys. The straw pallet whispers across 600 years that normal is only a truce between survival needs and cultural priorities. If sleep could bend for candles, clocks, and capitalism, might other routines, workdays, wages rights bend as well? That question prepares us for a leap in both time and intention. Picture the opposite of a medieval cottage, a rattling Greyhound bus barreling up Highway 17 toward Washington, D.C., in the humid August darkness of 1963. Neon motel signs and truck stop fluorescents strobe through the windows, replacing moonlight with jittery color. Passengers clutch sack lunches, hymn books, union buttons, and mimeographed leaflets outlining 10 demands for dignity. Ministers trade scripture verses with college students. Machinists from Cleveland discuss overtime pay with sharecroppers from Alabama. They steal catnaps with necks kinked against glass because history has asked them to be alert at sunrise. Where medieval villagers guarded sleep to survive another harvest, these travelers surrender it to seed justice in the nation's conscience. Their biphasic night unfolds on asphalt, drowsing through Carolina pines, jolting awake at a Maryland rest stop, where state troopers hover, nodding off again, only when the bus sighs into the district just before dawn. That vigil becomes communion of spirit, much like monks chanting psalms or peasants rekindling the hearthheads. Bowed hearts, steady minds. Rehearsing the dream Dr. King will voice beneath Lincoln's marble gaze. They do not complain about broken rest. They treat it as down payment on a better morning. So let us close the cottage door. The final ember dims, and the tale of medieval slumber settles into ash. We have traced its contours, the straw, the fleas, the breathing chorus, the midnight watch, and watched it morph into today's inflexible prescription for 8 perfect hours. It is right to mourn certain losses, the communal warmth, the sanctioned pause for reflection, the humility that admits darkness cannot be banished, only borrowed against. Yet the central insight endures. Human schedules like clay respond to pressure. When survival insisted, people woke to tend goats. When industry insisted, they slept straight through. When justice insisted, they willingly stayed awake. Point 1, then, was never mere trivia about nightcaps and bedbugs. It was a lens through which we saw how a simple human act, closing one's eyes, illuminates the scaffolding of society. That negotiation between culture and biology continues tonight in alarms set too early in streaming shows, autoplaying at 2 a.m. in yawns stifled during morning meetings. Recognizing the pliability of sleep equips us with empathy and with questions. If the glow of a candle could rewrite circadian rhythms, what might the glow of moral conviction still rewrite in us? As the camera lifts from the village to the brightening sky, sunrise gilds thatch and slate alike. Here point 2 snaps the lid on night, so we can step into a different dawn, one ablaze with civic purpose, the March on Washington. Threads leading from straw pallets to bus seats remind us that rest and struggle are forever entwined. Darkness teaches patience. Waking teaches resolve. Pack that quiet wisdom beside your banner and your lunch pail. The night is over, and the long day of change is about to begin. The sky over the Potomac hangs hazy blue, already trembling with August heat, as bus doors hiss open along Independence Avenue. Travelers who spent the night bumping shoulder to shoulder now spill onto the asphalt, stiff-legged but electric with purpose. They stretch roll poster tubes between palms and tuck sandwiches into coat pockets, even though sweat darkens starched collars. Across the mall, the dome of the Capitol gleams like a distant lighthouse, but the magnet that pulls every gaze is the towering figure of Abraham Lincoln, white and motionless at the end of a reflecting pool that shivers in the morning light. Wordless currents of anticipation course through the crowd, a low hum of greetings. The creak of guitar cases, the sharp whisper of banners unfurling hand-painted cloth, bearing pleas for jobs' dignity and the right to simply exist without fear. Even the breeze seems aware that it is turning history's pages. From the crest of the hill by the Washington Monument, the scene resembles a human river widening toward its delta. College students thread among Union men in Navy overalls. Nurses in crisp whites share shade with Baptist deacons in three-piece suits polished to Sunday sheen. Mothers hoist toddlers onto shoulders, their small hands shading eyes too young to measure the moment, yet keenly sensing its vibration. Volunteer marshals in straw boaters pass along the code of the day stay. Orderly sing when the spirit moves, drink water. Link arms if trouble nears. Police presence is visible but distant, as if the authorities have acknowledged that overwhelming peace can disarm suspicion better than any negotiation. At 10 o'clock, the first chords of We Shall Overcome glide from a makeshift stage, buoyed by a choir whose voices float above the crowd like ribbons of cool air. Some listeners clap on the downbeat. Others sway, with hands nestled around elbows, an improvised embrace that holds friends and strangers alike. Yet beneath the music, a collective heartbeat quickens, aware that songs alone cannot fill the ledger of overdue justice. Speakers step forward, each carrying a slice of the nation's unfinished business. A. Philip Randolph. Tall and unbowed in his 70s, outlines economic demands in sentences stripped of poetry, but steeped in clarity, a living wage fare. Hiring federal action that turns law into bread on the table. Walter Reuther, the labor leader, insists that civil rights and workers' rights share the same bone and sinew. Mahalia Jackson's contralto then rolls across the mall, a living bell, tolling for souls still shackled by poverty and fear, and the crowd answers with cheers that crest like surf against marble steps. Heat presses down, heavy as wet wool, but nobody retreats. Volunteers hand out paper fans emblazoned with NAACP, or I Am a Man, and the fluttering cardboard looks from above like 1,000 moths beating toward a new flame. Reporters roam with bulky cameras, their lenses hungry for faces that will fill newsreels and front pages. They linger on a young girl in patent leather shoes who recites verses about liberty, and on a gray-haired veteran whose uniform cap still bears tarnished brass from World War I. The image library of the nation expands with every shutter click, capturing a mosaic of resolve too vast to fit inside any single headline. When Martin Luther King Jr. finally approaches the podium, the afternoon sun crowns his silhouette in shimmering silver. He grips the lectern as though steadying not just himself, but the fragile promise hovering over the gathered multitude. His prepared text begins with measured cadence, purposeful and judicial cataloging grievances, and exhorting legislation. Yet a restlessness flutters among the front rows. Mahalia Jackson, standing behind him, senses the moment and leans forward. "Tell him about the dream, Martin." The plea detonates something elemental. He sets the papers aside, eyes sweeping the crowd, and begins to paint, in vibrant strokes, the nation that could be a land where children of former slaves and slaveholders sit at the same table, where justice flows like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Each phrase lands with the crisp authority of gospel truth, yet its power blooms from the collective memory of everyone who has ever envisioned freedom in the hush between night's two sleeps. The words echo off the reflecting pool, ricochet against the granite of the memorial, and settle into the marrow of those listening. People who arrived weary now stand taller, their spines aligning with a future suddenly rendered visible. Tears streak cheeks without embarrassment. Laughter bursts when King's voice lifts in unexpected joy. Silence falls in the spaces between metaphors, thick and reverent as cathedral air. When he concludes, the applause is less an eruption than an enormous sigh. Relief, awe, and commitment braided into a single sound that seems to roll the very earth forward by inches. Even as speeches give way to music and the formal program winds down, no one is eager to disperse. Instead, clusters form beneath patchy elms, retelling favorite lines, swapping hometown addresses, planning next steps. Volunteers gather discarded cups and stack folding chairs, but the spirit of the day refuses to be swept away so easily. Some marchers wander to the Supreme Court steps, laying petitions in neat rows as though planting seeds. Others drift toward Union Station boarding buses that will carry them back to towns where sheriff's eyes still narrow at any sign of change. The evening train schedules cannot contain their heightened pulse. They hum freedom songs in dining cars, annotate notebook margins, with strategy vow that the road home is only a midpoint on a longer pilgrimage. Night settles at last, a velvet sibling to the medieval darkness that once enfolded straw pallets and midnight milkings. Yet this darkness is laced with electric streetlights and restless thought. Travelers doze against window glass jackets, folded as pillows, but dreams do not wait for second sleep. They spring to life immediately bright, with slogans staffed by courageous companions, scored by the echo of a voice declaring, "I have a dream." In cramped seats, they practice speeches, draft letters, rehearse introductions. For union meetings and church socials, the body may clutch at rest, but the mind walks on convinced that fatigue is a fee gladly paid for a dawn that belongs to everyone. Somewhere beyond the tracks, in quiet neighborhoods and rural lanes, porch lights click off one by one, and America slips back into its customary silhouette. Yet something subtle has shifted in the national fabric, like a stitch pulled tight at the hem of a garment, inexorably reshaping the fit. A bus driver in Georgia hums "We Shall Overcome" without realizing. A schoolteacher in Ohio rearranges lesson plans to include fresh history. A teenage boy in Los Angeles pins a newspaper clipping beside his bedside lamp, letting the grainy black and white freeze frame of Lincoln Memorial steps stand guard over his ambitions. The march is over, yet it walks on through thousands of ordinary Tuesdays, through ballot boxes and courtrooms, through lullabies sung to infants who will reach adulthood with their own list of dreams to proclaim. And so, the journey that began in the hush of medieval nights, where survival forged peculiar rituals of waking and rest, arrives in the charged daylight of civic awakening. Across centuries and continents, human beings have risen from whatever beds they possessed. Straw-stuffed sacks, Pullman seats, factory couches during lunch breaks to answer the same summons make the world kinder than you found it. The echo of that summons now lingers in the air you breathe in the screen before you in the quiet moment after this story fades. Close your eyes if you wish, but listen closely. Somewhere a new bell of justice is beginning to ring, calling sleepers to rise again. Night settles over Washington once more this time, without the thunder of chanting voices or the crackle of megaphones. Yet the lingering warmth of that August day clings to every marble column. Inside row houses on U Street, the jubilant marchers who stayed behind settle onto borrowed couches and sway in exhausted silence. Outside, street lamps cast amber halos on sidewalks still patterned with footprints and confetti-like flyers. A jazz trio spills soft horns from an open club door, notes rising like fireflies. Even the monuments appear to exhale, as though relieved to have witnessed hope rather than sorrow. 3 blocks away, a young reporter returning to the newsroom pauses on the curb notebook, limp with ink. She lifts her eyes to the sky and finds the same waxing moon that once oversaw medieval villagers dividing night into halves. Tonight, it witnesses something different, a country newly awake to its own unfinished pledge. The reporter's lead paragraph will carry neither bombast nor cliché, only the steady pulse of facts. Yet she knows that between the lines, readers will hear drums, hymns, and the hush before a dream becomes declaration. Legislators across town cannot so easily sleep. Some pace mahogany corridors, replaying speeches that struck them like flint. Others sit beneath desk lamps, annotating drafts of bills suddenly urgent. In small apartments, clerks fresh from law school. Practice arguments for hearings not yet scheduled. The city hums with invisible relay batons, passing from marcher to lawmaker, to aid every bearer alert despite fatigue. Outside the Potomac mirrors, a stray breeze rippling under moonlight, the way ideas ripple through hearts too restless for first sleep, let alone a second. Days stretch into weeks. Summer's haze surrenders to crisp autumn, and the March on Washington settles into newsprint archives, yet its sparks refuse to dim. In Birmingham, a cafeteria server turns the page of Jet magazine, sees the Lincoln Memorial thronged with faces like hers, and applies for a voter registration card, though poll taxes still loom. In Minneapolis, a steelworker's daughter tucks a clipping into her civics textbook, tracing fingertips over King's silhouette before closing the cover with new resolve. Even in towns where the local paper buried the story behind weather reports, rumors seep through barbershops and church basements. Real change feels dangerously possible. One winter evening with the Civil Rights Act, still only a contentious draft. A coal miner in West Virginia returns from a double shift, grime ghosting every crease of his face. He drops into his kitchen chair, hardly more comfortable than a medieval straw sack, and flicks on the radio. Instead of bluegrass, he finds coverage of a filibuster senators, trading hours-long speeches for and against equality. The miner's daughter perched at the table works arithmetic problems by kerosene light. Pausing, she asks why anyone would speak so long to stall progress. Her father stares at the flame quivering inside the glass chimney and answers in a voice weighed with both anger and wonder. Because some men fear, tomorrow will be fair. He does not realize this single sentence will steer her toward law school, nor that she will cite it in a graduation speech 15 years hence. Legislation finally passes, signatures flourish beneath televised flashes, and jubilant crowds spill into streets again. Yet nights remain broken. In Selma, guards rattle cell doors to keep arrestees awake. In Chicago, mothers rock colicky infants beside windows, rattling with construction crews racing to comply with new integration mandates. Sleep becomes a currency traded for letters to editors' late-night strategy sessions and quiet prayers audible only to ceiling beams. The pattern feels familiar, ancestral, even as though humanity once trained itself during medieval interludes to meet each historic threshold with eyes half-open, hearts fully alert. Years arc forward, and the country's glow intensifies from city neon to the bluish flicker of television sets, broadcasting moon landings, war reports, and late-night talk shows. 8-hour sleep begins to fracture again, this time not by candlelight, but by the soft chime of breaking news. In 1989, a Boston night shift nurse jolts awake on her couch to images of the Berlin Wall crumbling. She weeps, marveling that history can pivot while ordinary people clutch coffee mugs and remote controls. 2 decades later, smartphones buzz on bedside tables at 3 a.m., dragging thumbs across glass to witness revolutions streaming live. The medieval gap between sleeps re-emerges newly electrified, carrying hashtags instead of psalms. Amid this digital dusk, a teenager in Manila scrolls through footage of the 1963 march during a sleepless night before an algebra exam. She watches King's Dream crystallize in grayscale, then taps into a video of recent protests in her own streets. Rhythms echoing across languages and continents. Her mother, passing the door, reminds her to rest. But she stays awake a little longer, scribbling phrases in a notebook she will later hold above her head outside the city hall. Once again, insomnia serves purpose. Once again, the night makes room for courage. Meanwhile, scientists publish studies confirming what medieval villagers had practiced in timbered cottages. Fragmented sleep is a natural rhythm, though screens and schedules now dictate its cadence. Wellness gurus market polyphasic templates, promising sharper minds to those who partition their nights. Pods of Silicon Valley developers nap in staggered shifts beside humming servers, believing progress flows faster if no one truly stops. Yet an echo of straw pallets persists. People still seek warmth in shared spaces. Forums, live streams, group chats curling up beside strangers for solidarity when the world grows drafty with doubt. All the while, the Lincoln Memorial stands watch its stone eyes reflecting smartphone flashes instead of paper fans. Tourists frame selfies where marchers once locked arms. Joggers trace loops around the reflecting pool before sunrise. Maintenance workers polish the marble floor, whose vibrations once carried the weight of 250,000 pounding hearts. Some evening soon, another cause will call citizens to these steps. Climate wages peace, and they will arrive with banners updated, but aspirations unchanged. They may come weary from overnight flights or harried by app alerts, yet they will gather, sing, and believe. When they disperse, whether triumphant or resolute to fight on the night will greet them with the same ancient question. How will you rest, knowing the world still tilts? Some will split their sleep without naming the practice. Waking at midnight to post reflections, soothe colic, or simply sit beneath porch lights, nursing mugs of tea, while owls carve the silence. Others will crawl beneath weighted blankets and surrender to a solid stretch, trusting daylight to resume the watch. Either way, every sleeper remains heir to an unbroken lineage, from peasants tending embers to marchers, gripping placards to activists, refreshing feeds, each stitching resolve into the dark in preparation for dawn. If you're listening now, perhaps preparing for bed, feel the quiet hum threaded through your pulse. It belongs to hay crackling under patched quilts, to voices rising over the mall, to notifications blooming on midnight screens. Let it remind you that rest is not withdrawal, but renewal that dreams literal and figurative spark when the world lies hushed. Close your eyes if you need to, or sit a while longer and breathe. Somewhere, a candle still gutters in a window, a bus engine idles at a state line, and a lone figure illuminates their face with phone light. drafting words they hope will matter. Come morning. History leans forward, attentive, waiting for the next sleeper to rise and step into its unfolding story. Night rain drifts across the continent like a slow-moving curtain dousing city skylines. First in Seattle, then Denver, then Chicago, until finally the weather settles on the eastern seaboard, where damp streets glisten under sodium lamps. Through each time zone, in apartments stacked like honeycomb pockets of glow persist behind drawn curtains. Late shift nurses shaking off. Adrenaline graduate students chasing deadlines. Security guards rotating between monitors. They wrap hands around ceramic mugs. Steam fogs their glasses, and for a fleeting moment, every screen-lit face could belong to the same quiet vigil. Outside traffic thins to a hush. Inside, a familiar decision returns to surrender to sleep, or to keep watch a little longer, adding one more ember to the long human chain of overnight sentries. In a 12th floor studio overlooking Brooklyn's Gowanus Canal, a community organizer named Lena spreads leaflets across her kitchen table. The ink is still tacky, her printer jammed twice, yet Dawn's meeting cannot wait. She pours cheap black tea, the bitter kind that jolts her eyelids wider than comfort, and plays an archival recording of King's Lincoln Memorial speech on her phone. His cadence threads softly through the living room, blending with the patter of rain against aluminum sashes. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor's baby wails, a subway train rumbles, and sirens wail briefly before dissolving into distant echo. The city's nocturnal symphony reminds her that millions remain awake voluntarily or otherwise, sharing the same restless edge between action and exhaustion. Lena's leaflets argue for affordable housing, one more battle in a borough reshaped by rents that tower higher than its skyline cranes. She has highlighted numbers in red, underlined phrases in Sharpie annotated margins with stray ideas, pop-up health clinic rotating childcare crew, bilingual call-in line. Her handwriting loops and overlaps as though thoughts refuse to cue politely. She yawns, not from boredom, but from the physical toll of 3 consecutive evenings spent canvassing after work. Still, she presses on, compelled by a force older than 21st century activism, the ancient instinct to guard the hearth while others sleep to keep the story moving forward, no matter how slow the turn of the page. Across the Atlantic, morning has already broken over the Dolomites, turning limestone peaks pink. In a small Italian village, 85-year-old Carlo rises before the church bells. Habit drags him from bed, hips stiff, knees crackling. Yet memory spurs him down narrow cobblestones to the bakery his father once owned. During the war, Carlo's family would split the night, much like medieval peasants baking bread at midnight, so villagers could queue at sunrise despite blackout curtains and ration stamps. Now, though the shop is shuttered, he visits the doorway each dawn, touching the worn wood and muttering prayers for those lost to hunger and gunfire. He carries with him a battered radio tuned to European Parliament debates on refugee resettlement. Hearing younger politicians invoke liberty, he feels the same ember stir that first glowed when news of the 1963 march reached his Alpine Valley via scratchy shortwave. He knows little English, but the phrase, "I have a dream," needs no translation. It tumbles through him like rising yeast. Back in Brooklyn, the rain eases, dragging gray light across Lena's windows. She stacks the leaflets, seals them in plastic, then slings a tote bag over her shoulder, ready to brave puddles and subway delays. Before stepping out, she pauses at her cramped bookshelf. Wedged between dog-eared policy manuals lies a slim volume of medieval folklore she purchased on a whim at a thrift stall. Its pages describe biphasic sleep night watches and the way villagers once interpreted dreams as maps for real-world choices. She flips to a random passage where a shepherd awakes at midnight, interprets a star's position, and decides to lead his flock to higher pasture, thus saving them from a flash flood at dawn. Closing the book, Lena thinks of her own neighborhood, perched precariously on spiraling rent. Maybe her phone-lit hours at the kitchen table play a similar role, a midnight reading of signs steering the flock away from unseen danger. She steps into the corridor, hears another door click shut. 2 stories above, and catches the shuffle of an elderly tenant beginning her early shift at the hospital cafeteria. No greetings are exchanged, but a silent solidarity passes between them 2 solo travelers joined by purpose larger than comfort. At street level, the air smells of diesel and wet asphalt. A bus hisses curbside, and Lena boards nodding at a driver whose thermos label reads, "Night Owl's Fuel." Half the passengers doze foreheads against windows, headphones leaking faint rhythms. She finds an empty seat and gazes at the blurred kaleidoscope of city lights, every reflection a reminder that rest and motion are not opposites, but partners in an endless dance. On the other side of the planet, Manila's humidity swells even before sunrise. A teenage student named Maya cycles along a riverside path phone mounted on her handlebars, streaming a podcast about global youth movements. The host quotes lines from a medieval monk writing by candlelight, marveling at how the monk's nocturnal sermons eventually spurred social reforms in his town. Maya pedals faster, sweat beading her brow, imagining candlelight replaced by the soft glow of her phone. She rehearses a petition she plans to present at school, install more water fountains so classmates no longer ration thirst. It seems small, yet she recalls footage of millions marching on Washington and understands how modest demands stacked and persistent can alter the course of nations. Daybreak now reaches the Gowanus Canal, tinting murky water coral. From her bus seat, Lena sees the sunrise mirrored in the oily surface, a bruised rainbow, imperfect, but undeniably bright. She whispers lines from King, almost without thinking. This is not the time to cool off. A sleepy barista on the corner cafe waves her inside before official opening hours, recognizing the dark circles beneath her eyes as badges of shared commitment. He hands her a steaming cup on the house, and she repays him with one of her leaflets. Their exchange is wordless yet layered caffeine for compassion, solidarity for sleeplessness. In that delicate threshold between night's end and day's launch, the world feels suspended, a breath held. Buses break doors, fold open. Church bells peal in Italian valleys. Birds wheel over tropic rivers. Servers boot up databases in anonymous office blocks. Each motion traces back to someone choosing wakefulness, if only for a heartbeat in service of a larger dream. Perhaps the medieval habit of dividing the night was never an oddity, but rehearsal training humanity to break slumber when duty knocks to rise and rekindle dying coals to keep the circle of warmth unbroken. By mid-morning, leaflets pass from Lena's tote into eager hands, metro commuters debate statistics, and a community center's folding chairs fill with residents who thought they were alone in their frustrations. Far away, Carlo returns home, as sunlight spills over the bakery rooftops, humming a hymn that once soothed townspeople hiding from air raid sirens. In Manila, Maya's petition garners 80 signatures before the lunch bell rings. Each small victory folds into the global quilt of nocturnal labor and daylight action. And when evening comes again, because it always does, millions will face the same choice at the edge of sleep. Some will close weary eyes and surrender to the long stretch. Others will rise at midnight, guided by moonlight smartphone glow or the quiet blaze of conscience. Wherever you find yourself under that turning canopy of stars, whether poring over spreadsheets rocking a restless child, or standing sentinel beside embers that refuse to die, know that you are neither the first nor the last to trade sleep for stewardship. The path from straw pallets to freedom rallies from hushed cottages, to neon streets winds through every sleepless heart that believes dawn can be made kinder. So listen to the rain if it falls to the city, if it hums to your own pulse, if nothing else. These are the drums of centuries calling you onward. When your eyelids finally flutter shut, may dreams come swift and strong, not as escape, but as blueprint ready to guide your next awakening. Morning light spills across a quiet street in Lagos, Nigeria, where Ayodele rouses his younger sister from deep sleep. The midday sun will be blistering, but before then, a neighborhood vigil will form outside the crowded clinic that barely keeps pace with rising cases of cholera. Ayodele pads down narrow stairs, sandals slapping damp concrete. In the kitchen, he warms a kettle on a single-burner stove, listening to the hiss of steam as if it were a metronome, marking time until the water boils. His sister, still half lost in dreams of childhood games, yawns and rubs her eyes, settling into his shoulder like a sparrow seeking warmth. He pours tea into chipped mugs and places one in her small hands. Today, she will be at school memorizing equations, but tonight she will accompany him as he distributes leaflets, warning of contaminated wells, and teaching how to purify water with bleach or pastilles. In 6 hours, their city will throb with midday heat. Right now, dawn offers a softer touch, a chance to gather strength before the day's challenges. Before the sun crests the horizon, groups of volunteers converge beneath a lone streetlight, plotting routes on crumpled maps. Some carry jerry cans filled with clean water. Others tote posters, hand-painted with blue ribbon symbols of safe drinking. A few survey the muddy edges of refuse piles, searching for containers where disease breeds. Among them is Emeka, a local pastor who learned long ago that hope can be bottled, distributed, and shared. His voice is gentle, yet unwavering, as he outlines the day's plan, reminding everyone to avoid fatigue, to rest when possible, and to lean on each other if the burden grows heavy. But there is no shame in exhaustion. Just as medieval villagers once rose between sleeps to tend livestock. These volunteers accept that vigilance requires sacrifice. They carry their own history in their bones, nights spent praying for rain, nights spent guarding lanterns against wind nights, spent watching over newborns whose cries could mean life or death. Across the Atlantic, a high school classroom in Boise, Idaho, sits empty under rows of fluorescent lights. Later this morning, Principal Martinez will post a notice asking for funds to repair the auditorium roof bent by a winter snowstorm last year. But last night, a group of students stayed late after soccer practice and debating club to draft a petition demanding equitable funding for sports and arts programs. They danced between grumbling stomachs and yawning heads fueled by pizza boxes and shared ambition. In hushed voices, they debated language. Should we mention Title IX explicitly? Do we need to cite district budget reports? Each question landed with subtle gravity. They understood that words crafted on caffeine and adrenaline might hold the power to reshape their school's priorities. Their final draft included clauses promising to monitor expenditures, to hold monthly forums, and to mentor younger students eager to follow their lead. At 10:14 p.m., they typed the last line, offered silent nods, and collapsed into chairs, letting their eyelids fall in waves despite the strobing glow of monitors still burning on the desks. When they finally headed home, some walking, some pedaling bikes, they carried with them a sense that staying awake had been their first act of stewardship. Meanwhile, in the medieval chamber of the Château de Fougères, an ancient oaken bed groaned under the weight of nobles gathered for a midnight council. Long before electricity or print, these lords and ladies huddled around candlelit maps, plotting strategies to repel invaders at the castle's doorstep. The cold stones soaked up their breath as they whispered, If we send scouts at dawn, we can flank their archers. Our provisions will last only 3 days without fresh grain. Their sleep was segmented by necessity. They would stand watch-send runners to the next keep and return to rest only when the horizon glowed pale. In those hours, they mapped the fate of feudal lands, studying star positions to forecast weather, believing that the heavens spoke guidance if one only listened in stillness. Their vigilance, born of survival, became legend songs sung by minstrels as early morning villagers emerged from their first sleep, stamping boots and straightening tunics, unaware that the fate of their lives had been negotiated while they slumbered. Fast forward to a rooftop garden in Karachi, Pakistan, where Salima plants ginger and turmeric in terracotta pots. Last night, after returning from a 12-hour shift at the textile mill, she spent an hour watering seedlings under moonlight, checking the serrated leaves for pests. By midnight, she was poring over text messages from a women's health cooperative, arranging a meeting to educate factory workers about prenatal care. The city outside never truly sleeps rickshaws, whir-past televisions glow through open windows, and street hawkers call out their wares beneath sodium lamps. Yet Salima's hands move with serene focus, as though she has tapped into an ancient pulse, the pulse of mothers who once awakened to feed goats, to stir communal bread, to tend fields before sunrise. Her act of planting is both literal and symbolic. The herbs she cultivates will spice curries, soothe stomachs, and remind neighbors that well-being begins at home, but blossoms through collective effort. When she finally ascends the stairs to her modest apartment, she traces the horizon's outline with a tired smile, and exhales another day begins shaped by choices made in the witching hours. In a suburban house outside Sao Paulo, Brazil, researcher Diego pads across hardwood floors toward a glass cabinet brimming with journals and bound theses. Before dawn, he plans to meet colleagues in a university lab to analyze data on urban heat islands and their effect on sleep patterns. Camped in a hammock overnight, he recorded ambient temperatures, plotted shifts in humidity, and logged every passing car horn. While most would scoff at electing to stay awake beneath a mosquito net, Diego knows that some insights only emerge in the stillness when most of the world is hushed. His work will inform city planners who must weigh nighttime cooling strategies like green roofs and reflective pavement against skyrocketing energy demands. In medieval times, villagers contended with drafts and dung. Today, city dwellers contend with smog and structural inertia. Yet the principle remains understanding. Darkness can illuminate solutions for daylight. As he clicks off the last line of his midnight memo, he feels kinship with those who have kept watch before him. Monks, farmers, activists. Hands moving across papers in candle-lit rooms, driven by the belief that each discovery pulses with purpose. Dusk drapes its shawl across global horizons. In Rwanda, a community radio station broadcasts a twilight program calling for peace and reconciliation. In Melbourne, a nurse checks ventilator settings in an intensive care unit, pausing only to swab calloused fingers on her jeans before scribbling notes. In Reykjavik, an environmental artist sketches lines on ice blocks destined for a summer exhibit on melting glaciers. In every corner of the world, someone chooses to remain awake, often at the brink of exhaustion, because a furnace of urgency burns too hot to wait. They carry responsibilities that outlast their own lifespans. The gardener nurturing a seedling that will feed generations, the student fighting for equal voices in democracy, the researcher modeling cities where sleep is as restorative as nature intended. Each life threads into a tapestry woven by sleepless artisans, and the pattern grows richer with every errant hour. Finally, in a lighthouse perched on a rocky promontory off the coast of Maine, Keeper Dorothy stands at the top of a spiral staircase, gazing out at waves lashing against black crags. She has tended this lantern through countless nights, various seasons, and uncounted storms, much like a medieval watchman scanning horizons for enemy sails. Tonight, a dense fog crept in, silently silencing seabirds and mirroring the uncertainty washing over distant lands. But Dorothy's vigil remains unwavering. She winds the clockwork mechanism so the light continues its faithful arc every 15 seconds. Sailors steering darkened decks rely on this beam to guide them through treacherous channels. One misstep tides could push them onto hidden shoals. She inhales the salty air, her breath mingling with the smell of burning oil and damp kelp. In her mind, she hums a lullaby learned from her grandmother, a lullaby that once lulled her to sleep beneath patchwork quilts. Tonight, she transforms the lullaby into a beacon, singing not for slumber, but for safe passage for the promise of dawn that will arrive regardless of her fatigue. When the fog lifts and first light breaks, the lighthouse remains silent sentinel now, at rest, awaiting the next night's call. Yawning gulls wheel overhead. Distant fishermen pause to bless the sunrise. Other keepers in far-flung outposts switch on their lamps, extending a chain of light across oceans. The world exhales, marveling at how many remain awake to ensure that sleep will find them next. Medieval peasants once rose to milk cows under moonlight. Civil rights marchers once trembled with hope on white marble steps. Global citizens now bend time and embrace exhaustion to champion water health equality and the fragile ecosystems that cradle all life. In this continuum, every sleepless hour is a stitch weaving solidarity between past and future, between the hay-choked cottages and the humming cities, between solitary shepherds and bustling metropolises. So, as your own evening descends, whether guided by a smartphone's glow, a candle's flicker, or nothing but your own breath, remember that beneath whatever canopy of stars you see you stand among ancestors and heirs alike. You may choose to rest, and that rest belongs entirely to you. Or you may choose to wake, joining a lineage that every time zone, every century, every cause has honored by keeping watch when darkness beckoned. Whatever choice you make will ripple outward, shaping dawn in ways you cannot yet foresee. In that fragile moment before the world fully stirs, you hold the power to guide a flock, to stoke a movement, to light a lantern, just as countless others have done since time immemorial. Dawn's first light threads through the slatted windows of a dingy three-room tenement in the East End of London, stirring Ahmed awake from a dream of distant dunes. He blinks against the coppery glow, recalling that last night he pounded pavement in a rally for workers' rights, clutching a placard that read, "Fair wages now." His feet throb from standing on icy cobblestones as speeches echoed beneath gas lamps. He had nodded to glittering shopkeepers, locking shutters, and heard the muffled prayers of families tucking children into straw pallets in cellars, just like his own. Now, in this uneasy hour between dark and light, he feels both witness and participant in an ancient ritual, waking in order to act. The kettle on his small stove hisses alive, filling the cramped room with steam. He pours scalding tea into chipped mugs, one for himself, one for his wife, Sophia, who stirs beside him, sleep-stained eyes widening at the warmth. They share a silent nod. Neither needs to explain that today, like many days before, demands more than ordinary rest allows. Outside, factory whistles will shriek at 6, summoning laborers from beds too short, too hard, too early. Yet this narrow window of half-awakeness offers them a moment to gather resolve to sip bitter liquid that soothes throats raw from chanting slogans in the night air. Workers will file out into the gray dawn, heading for brickyards, textile mills, and docks, but for now they linger, savoring the hush. In a cottage by the Somme across the channel, Marie rises from a feather-stuffed pallet and dons a threadbare shawl. Beyond her garden fields slope toward morning mist. This dawn is not like others. For 2 days running, she has watched columned soldiers leave at twilight, bayonets glinting, and return before dawn, thin as ghosts. Last night, she spent hours stitching bandages by candlelight for the wounded stream of carts rolling through. Between her stitches, she listened to nurses' whispered prayers and the rattling breath of men cradled on straw pallets in makeshift tents. Nothing about this waking feels ordinary. Each heartbeat animates a fear that the dawn will bring fresh orders, fresh departures. Yet she steels herself, knowing that before the sun climbs higher, she must face news of loss and gather strength to summon wounded fighters to tea, to mercy, to lullabies sung against the thunder of distant guns. Half a world away, in Kyoto, Masao steps onto the polished wooden floor of his family's tea house as lanterns flicker blue-white in the pre-dawn air. He polishes the tea whisk and sips water drawn from a spring chilled by overnight rains. Today, the city hums with anticipation proposals for a new communal well and irrigation project rest before the village council. Farmers will convene at sunrise, debating whether progress must cost tradition. Masao, whose livelihood depends on pointing anxious tourists to tranquil gardens, wonders if the world's pace has eclipsed the pace of his ancestors. Last night, he lent his voice to neighbors calling for improved channels to keep rice paddies fertile. They stood beneath cherry trees in blossom petals, drifting like whispered prayers, and pledged to remain vigilant until compromise emerged. In this half-light, he feels the weight of both heritage and future edges blurred as dreams bleed into reality. The sun inches over the horizon in Buenos Aires, igniting the spines of high-rise buildings with a pink halo. Inside a cramped apartment in La Boca, Lucia tightens a shawl around her shoulders, listening to cries from a neighbor's child before carefully hoisting a satchel onto her back. She teaches literacy classes by day and volunteers at a shelter each evening, distributing blankets to families sleeping in parks. Last night's frigid wind bit through tattered coats. Some parents dozed around small fires to stay warm. She watched them as she passed plates of stew faces, half lulled by exhaustion, half lit by hope. In a moment, she will board a tram to join colleagues at a community center, strategizing ways to petition local government for more resources. But for now, the hush between sleeps offers her solitude time to reflect on stories of grandparents who once cooked over wood stoves and kept goats indoors to stave off hunger. Their sacrifices, she senses, pulse through her own actions in this sleepless stretch between night's end and day's demands. At the same hour in Nairobi, stray dogs weave between the legs of carpenter benches as Amina shuts her eyes, absorbing the distant lowing of cattle from the market. Yesterday, she led her coop of 5 women through a forest of eucalyptus, gathering firewood for villages that have battled drought for months. They returned under a full moon that lit cobs of cracked maize, but each step toward home carried the ache of halfway rest, a single sleep before dark, another before dawn. Amina's husband rests on a reed mat in the open veranda, snoring softly as he dreams of rains that might coax seedlings to sprout. When she rises, she will shape dough into flatbreads and stoke embers for breakfast porridge. She will notice the sun climbing precariously overhead by 10, outpacing the hour they crave. Yet in this moment's seam, Amina feels connected to ancestors who once greeted daybreak by winnowing grain and chanting blessings to the soil. She inhales dust-laced air, tasting both fear and faith-fear that the harvest will fail, faith that community will endure. In a loft apartment in Chicago, Javier stirs at the guitar's first chord vibrating from a neighbor's open window. He sits upright on a sagging couch, rubbing slumber from his eyes, and reaches for his well-worn journal. Last night's jam session with fellow musicians in Pilsen ended well past midnight. They improvised blues riffs layered over spoken word verses, decrying corporate disinvestment in working-class neighborhoods. The music spilled into the street, drawing passers-by from bars and bodegas. He felt the pulse of movement in each strum poetry, born from the friction of pent-up sleep and pent-up impotence. Now he sketches lyrics beneath a lamp, winked to life by a timer. We dream in chords, we march in loops. He knows his words will merge with drum beats this evening, fueling a rally for affordable housing and better transit. But first, he must write burying penned lines in the margins before. Dawn steals more of his thoughts. Meanwhile, atop a windswept plateau in Mongolia, Enktuya wraps thick woolen robes around her and settles by a yurt's low wooden frame. Beneath her layers of felt and animal hides cocoon her from frozen ground. She stirs yak butter tea in a carved wooden bowl, sensing reverberations from distant hooves, herding parties, returning after a night's watch to protect livestock from marauding wolves. When they arrive, she will guide them in hopeful prayers, dispelling bad omens believed to lurk in pre-dawn shadows. Last night, she listened for those shadows herself. Moonlight sifting through furs as she knotted threads into horsehair ropes and mended torn saddles. Her fingers bled from the coarse material, but she labored without complaint. In her craft, she threads both utility and tradition, knowing that when the yurt seals at dusk, they will trust her work to shield them through the coldest nights. Now, as she rises from her pallet, the first shafts of pale amber sunlight strike the top of the yurt, and she feels the ancient pulse binding her orders of sleep to the renewal of each sunrise. Across continents in São Paulo's dizzying sprawl, pockets of resilience form above the roar of traffic. A coalition of educators crafts a platform to address school dropout rates. A doctor assembles a network to deliver mobile clinics. A poet composes verses to bolster protests for public transportation reform. Each individual wakes before the city fully stirs, some from beds too crowded, some from couches too thin, some from restless nights haunted by the hum of electricity and distant sirens. Yet despite the absence of straw mattresses, modern midnight alarms, or flickering lanterns, their awakenings carry the same ancient conviction that surveillance by self is the prelude to safeguarding others. Even as the sun climbs higher and cityscapes transform under its glare, the quiet of early morning lingers in their veins. They carry it like an ember tucked between fingernails, warm, elusive, sustaining. They hold on to the memory of darkness softened by purpose, the thrill of voices lifting in a shared chant, the hush after a speech that crackles like lightning, the gentle hum of a single lamp illuminating a map of tomorrow's mobilization. And though their palms may blister from pamphlets past, their voices may crack from shouting into bitter winds. Their limbs may tremble from lack of sleep, they continue. For they understand that a single person awake can spark 1,000 aware souls. In every time zone, these nocturnal guardians eventually yield to the sun's insistence, slipping into a first sleep that dreams of the crowds whose signs still bob in front of Parliament or City Hall, dreaming of famished refugees clutching new passports under porch lights, dreaming of elders knitting blankets in hospice rooms where the hum of monitors keeps darkness at bay. And when their eyelids part for second rest, they awaken again, not from dreams, but from resolve to greet the responsibility spun from the night's labor. In that cyclical return to rest, they honor the continuum that began long ago, from shepherds watching stars to guides navigating shipwrecked hulls, from villagers milking cows to marchers raising placards. Their vigilant nights, though separated by half the globe and centuries apart, resonate with a shared melody, the melody of humanity, refusing to let slumber erase its duty to care, to fight, to build. And when they finally emerge from second sleep, they rise into a world nudged ever so slightly by their nocturnal work ready to stoke flames, cooled by daylight to herald new campaigns to kindle fresh possibilities. So let your own mind settle now, whether in a bustling metropolis or a secluded hamlet. Feel the gentle tug of sleep, but remember the echoes of every soul who once chose wakefulness in service to something greater. Whether your night ends with a whispered prayer, a printed poster, or a silent page written beneath lamplight, know that your dawn will carry both the weight and the glow of those who stood before you. Eyes wide in the half-dark, clutching the promise that when morning arrives, the work of renewal begins again. Across time zones and continents, as the sun reaches its zenith, and bodies succumb to the pull of midday respite, those who once stood sentinel in the stillness of pre-dawn now find themselves drifting toward the gentle void of first sleep. In a cramped dormitory on the outskirts of Nairobi, a nurse slides down white-painted walls to a creaky wooden bench, closing her eyes in the warmth of a brief lull after administering morning doses to children recovering from malaria. Her uniform, once starched and pristine, now crumples around shoulders, scorched by the unrelenting equatorial sun. Outside, schoolchildren pour into dusty streets, wearing backpacks too big for their frames. Dust clouds swirl behind their footsteps like stirred spirits wary of midday heat. She allows herself a moment on that bench, arms crossed one hand, cradling her aching temple, before blinking once-twice and rising to summon the strength for her next shift. Farther west, in a suburb of Lagos, where morning rituals fold into afternoon obligations, a teacher who stood before wide-eyed pupils at dawn returns home to an empty apartment, the door clicking shut with deliberate softness. She drapes a worn shawl across the back of a threadbare armchair, its pattern faded by years of choreography between classroom chalk dust and Sunday worship. As she settles into the cradle of slumber for what little remains of the afternoon, her mind wanders to the memory of her younger self. How, as a girl in the same neighborhood, she once accompanied her father on midnight patrols to secure water pumps before the crush of morning crowds. Now, as the cicadas drone outside her window, she dreams of leveraging her education to build schools rather than merely supply lessons, aware that the lull between waking and nightfall is as precious as any dawn chorus. On the other side of the planet, in a crowded high-rise overlooking the Han River in Seoul, a software engineer leans back from a bank of monitors, blinking rapidly, as fluorescent overhead lights hum in steady rhythm. Lines of code that once danced across screens like constellations now blur into a uniform hue of digital white. His cubicle is littered with empty paper coffee cups and post-it notes bearing half-formed algorithms. He sits motionless for a heartbeat, then exhales, letting his shoulders drop. Night's vigil spent debugging an application meant to connect farmers in Jeollanam-do with urban markets yields to a midday pause. He reaches for a pair of foam earplugs, stows them in his shirt pocket, and allows his eyelids to flutter shut while his body recharges for the evening's round of user tests. Meanwhile, a fisherman in a small bay off the coast of Portugal hauls nets aboard a weathered skiff, sweat glistening on furrowed brows as the water's surface shimmers beneath a merciless sun. Even as seagulls wheel overhead, he squints toward the horizon, gauging if waves born from yesterday's storm have settled to a forgiving rhythm. His arms ache from hauling in the catch. His sinews sting from salt spray that has crusted onto skin since dawn. He shares a fleeting glance with his crewmate, then allows himself a brief stretch on the deck, a concession to exhaustion earned by hauling nets while most of Lisbon lies unbothered in quiet reverie. He tilts his head back, letting the timber benches cradle him as his mind drifts toward the legend of a father who, in a time before diesel engines rose at midnight, to tend lamps and navigate through mist-shrouded coves. Sleep cradles him now, even as gulls continue their cries and salt-laden waves lap at the hull. In Bogotá, beneath the shadow of Monserrate, a street artist reclines behind a mural painted at first light, a kaleidoscope of hummingbirds swirling amid orchids. His paintbrush, discarded for the moment, rests on a chipped palette smeared with indigo and crimson. Passers-by hurry to lunch, but he remains unmoving, lulled by the hum of traffic and the scent of acetone in the fumes. In his half-slumber, he conjures memories of his grandmother's stories about indigenous artisans who once filled the plazas under starlit skies, etching patterns in clay and whispering blessings that promised good fortune for crops and communities alike. He dreams of resurrecting that tradition, of hosting midnight painting sessions on rooftops to remind his fellow citizens that every stroke of color can be a declaration of unity. Though his arms tremble from yesterday's marathon work, he exhales and drapes an old cotton sheet across his shoulders, sinking into the welcoming hush of an afternoon pause. Down in Melbourne, Australia, the archaeologist who excavated ancient middens along the coasts of Victoria reclines in a wooden chair on his veranda. An updraft ruffles pages of a weathered field journal. He cradles each entry, recounting the discovery of obsidian flakes, post holes, and charred middens that whisper of people who once paused at dusk to tend fires for cooking and ritual. He traces a finger along a hastily sketched map as magpies trumpet a midday chorus. Beyond eucalyptus, silhouettes clouds scrawl lazy scripts across a pale blue sky. He allows himself to drift, knowing that tonight he will reprise readings of these journals to an audience eager for traces of ancestral rhythms. Sleep will coax his mind into depths where his dreams stitch together ancient settlement patterns before the sun dips again, and he returns to pieces of broken pottery and shards of memory. In a remote outpost of northern Alaska, the shaman who tends to her people's spiritual and physical well-being sits cross-legged beside a smoking drum. Through a portaled window, she watches the tundra stretch out like an endless breath beneath wispy cloud tendrils. Her cheeks etched by wind, and time relax as she listens to the lowing of caribou returning to graze in sheltered valleys. Last night, she spent hours performing healing rites beneath the aurora's dance-raising incantations that she believed soothed restless souls and guided hunters home safe. Now, in the midday lull, when the land lies in a suspended hush, she leans against a carved pillar, closing her eyes to rest. In her dream slumber, ancient ancestors appear hunter-gatherers who awoke before first light to track caribou through ice-flecked dawns. She hears their voices murmuring blessings to the land, guiding her toward visions that will shape tomorrow's ceremonies. Even as the Arctic wind packs its chill against her wooden hut, she knows that her moment of rest is fertile ground for revelations that will fortify her people through another cycle of darkness and light. As afternoon wanes, the world persists in hushed evaluation, the labored breaths of rowers on the Ganges as they ferry pilgrims. The hum of silk looms in Yangon as artisans coax silk threads into brocades. The simmering cauldrons in Delhi kitchens, where a mother stirs lentils for children returning from school. In each of these pockets of stillness, slumber tugs at eyelids already blurred by the day's exertions. But rest is fleeting, for soon the sun's arc will descend toward horizon, and the promise of second wakefulness will beckon again. In villages nestled in the Andes, families stretch out cotton blankets upon terraced fields, napping beneath skies that darken as clouds gather for evening rains. Their dreams carry echoes of geological ages, memories of ancestors who rose at midnight to chant prayers for harmonious harvests and to watch the stars for prophecies of seasonal change. They awaken before dusk, refreshed enough to tend quinoa beds and feed alpacas. They know that the balance between sleep and wakefulness is as delicate as the ripening of grains. In Dublin, Ireland, a journalist emerges from a brief city centre siesta to join fellow reporters at a press centre covering environmental summits. She steps into cool autumn air, pulling a scarf tight around her neck as her mind sharpens from its repose. She recalls the monks of medieval abbeys who once transcribed texts by candlelight, rising in the dark to chant psalms, and then returning to communal beds for a second rest before dawn services. She senses kinship with those scribes, each of them laboring through the night, so that knowledge might survive, so that words might one day mold laws that tilt the world toward justice. The evening will find her typing articles that expose corporate polluters and celebrate renewable innovations. She shoulders this duty, knowing that her vigilance in the dark secures a brighter world for readers yet to awaken. As dusk coalesces into a veil of violet and amber, millions stir again, slipping from their brief midday sanctuaries to confront duties birthed in pre-dawn darkness. The nurse returns to her clinic to comfort a toddler whose fever soared unchecked. The teacher steps back into a classroom where empty desks await children who survived a cholera outbreak. The software engineer logs into a video call with rural farmers learning new digital tools. The fisherman navigates currents toward deeper waters to provide sustenance to distant shores. The street artist sketches final touches on a mural that will guide passers-by toward solidarity. The archaeologist dons gloves to brush sediment from artifacts that will illuminate human eternity. The shaman lights candles for a ceremony that seeks balance between humans and spirits. Each of these souls stands poised at the threshold, their bodies weary, their hearts buoyed by purpose, as they heed the ancient summons rise, for the night still holds tasks unfinished. And when they convene beneath lamplights, candles, neon signs, or moonbeams, their collective vigilance weaves a tapestry that wraps around the planet, binding medieval mills to urban metropolises, ancestral chants to modern manifestos. In that grand mosaic, sleep and wakefulness are not adversaries, but partners, each giving rise to the other in a ceaseless rhythm. As you, the listener, rest your head and drift toward your own first sleep, remember that within your slumber echoes the pulse of every hand that once rose to mend, to teach, to heal, to protest, to guide, and to paint voices woven into the infinite story of night's holy labor. Let your dreams carry the embers of ancient fires, the whispers of countless lanterns, and the quiet resolve of those who kept watch so that the day's light might be more just, more compassionate, more whole. Twilight unfurls its velvet shawl across the world, ushering in a hush that is neither complete nor serene, but pregnant with possibility. In Nairobi, where midday's lull yielded to a nurse's brief sanctuary on a creaky bench, the same caretaker now ties her hair into a tight bun and dons a well-worn scrub cap. The once empty clinic corridor now hums with the steady footfalls of mothers clutching sleeping infants, seeking fresh bandages and life-giving antibiotics. The nurse moves between them with measured calm, her palms pressed together as if in prayer, determined that no child should perish quietly in the pre-dawn hours. While dusk deepens beyond the barred windows, she administers doses by the glow of a single overhead lamp and leans close to soothe a toddler whose fever flares like a sputtering flame. She recalls how in a distant century, medieval villagers lit candles to fend off nocturnal terrors, pestilence rats, and the fear that a broken ember might mean catastrophe. Tonight, she channels that same vigilance, believing that each measured inhalation, each whispered lullaby, extends life a breath longer. Meanwhile, in Lagos, the teacher who permitted herself an accidental nap beneath the cicada's drone now emerges from her empty apartment into the humid evening. Her shawl, once draped over an armchair, now wraps snugly around her shoulders as she navigates alleyways lit by flickering lanterns. She steps onto a dirt path leading toward a gathering of neighbors who await her lesson on creating protective boundaries around contaminated water sources. As the sky deepens to indigo, she sets a battered projector against a mango tree and clicks through hand-scanned slides showing wolves of bacteria and the microscopic shapes of cholera bacilli. Families huddle on woven mats, shielding their children from mosquitoes that swarm like midnight confetti. With every word she speaks, measured calm, she embodies both educator and healer, lighting candles against ignorance as medieval monks once stoked hearth fires to ward off nightmares. When she concludes and guides her students to draw a new well outline in the red earth, she knows this act of teaching under fragile lamplight echoes across centuries. Knowledge poured into darkness becomes armor that shields future dawns. A world away in Seoul, the software engineer whose eyes fluttered shut against fluorescent monitors awakens at dusk to join an online forum connecting smallholder farmers in Jeollanam-do with city markets. He leans into a second screen while sipping instant coffee cooled by condensation keyboard clicks, echoing like miniature drum beats in the silent apartment. He monitors messages from farmers desperate to preserve crops during an unexpected early frost and guides them step by careful step through harvesting schedules that might save their livelihoods. Last night, inspired by ancient pastoral calendars, he coded a simple algorithm that predicts rainfall patterns based on lunar phases, recalling how medieval agronomists once read the sky's forewarnings with reverence. Now, as modern-day custodians of both data and tradition, he and his collaborators weave technology into the fabric of rural survival, believing that when darkness falls, algorithms can glow like beacons to those working plots beneath moonlit skies. In Buenos Aires, the street artist who drifted behind his mural's tremulous hues now stokes a small brazier beside the alley. He kneads fresh charcoal into a cylindrical brush, the red-orange coals dancing between his fingers like captive fireflies. Above him, neon advertisements flicker with a brassy intensity that threatens to blind the softer shades of twilight, yet he persists. Determined to complete the mural's final flourish, a chorus of raised fists carved into a backdrop of swirling sky. Families who slept among makeshift fires in park green spaces earlier now gather, watching through open windows as his brush draws solidarity lines across concrete. He recalls how indigenous artisans once painted communal walls under starlit skies, mapping their legends onto stone so that passers-by might remember their shared origins. Tonight, as he blends acrylics and aerosol under the hiss of passing cars, he believes his mural will stand as a testament to both night's clarity and day's promise, an invitation for onlookers to join in, forging bonds stronger than any sunrise. In Chicago, the writer who closed her notebook at dusk now steps into a rented workspace above a pressed metal door shop. She flicks on a lamp that casts long, leaning shadows across a desk littered with crumpled drafts and open books on environmental policy. The air carries the scent of motor oil wafting up from the street, mingling with the faint tang of spilled coffee. As children return to empty classrooms to finish assignments, she gathers edited quotes and fact-checked statistics that will become tomorrow's exposé on stormwater management and its link to public health. Her words emergent from a sacrament of nocturnal research pulse with urgency when rivers flood, when sewers back up, when wells sicken communities born in medieval cottages, and ones that hum with skyscrapers alike suffer. Late into the night, she types beneath humming fluorescent tubes, channeling the spirit of those medieval scribes who remained awake by candle flame so that wisdom might persist. Her fingers fly across the keys, instilling each sentence with the conviction, that daylight revelations often originate in the hush between midnights. On the windswept plateau of Mongolia Enktuya, the shaman whose midday dreams summoned ancestral blessings rekindles the yurt's central hearth with carefully gathered twigs. Outside, herds of yaks shift like colossal clouds of breath beneath a sky so vast it seems to cradle eternity. She places a bowl of water atop a low wooden altar and lights a juniper sprig, the smoke curling upward like tendrils of memory. Villagers emerge from distant jurs, warm, sleepy silhouettes wrapped in felt and wool drawn by the scent of sacred flame. They come bearing offerings, fresh wool from spring shearing hand-painted icons, and clusters of dried mushrooms for healing broths. They settle on mats arranged in a semicircle as she commences a chanting rite that binds together the physical and the spiritual. Her voice rises and falls like the wind itself, echoing prayers to the sky spirits that once guided tribe migrations and named the constellations by ancient births. In this nocturnal labored hush, she weaves a tapestry of protection. Tonight wolves will not venture too close. Illnesses will abate, and cold winds will soften their teeth until dawn warms the land once more. As dusk deepens into full night, the archaeologist in Melbourne who spent midday dreaming of charred middens and obsidian flakes descends from his veranda into the hushed library beneath his home. He turns on a small desk lamp, its golden glow awakening the dust motes swirling like microscopic dancers. The open pages of his field journal beckon sketches of pit alignments from a Bronze Age site, transcriptions of carbon dating results pieced together from laboratory reports. By candlelight and lamplight, he composes a lecture for students who will gather at dawn to learn how ancient peoples divided their nights between work and worship. He reflects on how the relentless hum of modernity still cannot dampen the revelation that knowing how predecessors harnessed both darkness and daylight can illuminate the challenges of our era: climate change, social inequity, pandemics. His voice remains silent now, but his pen conducts a symphony of thought, believing that when his audience arrives at sunrise, they too will grasp that every archaeological fragment pulses with lessons for today's broken rhythms. In Alaska's remote reaches, the shaman who drifted through midday in visions of ancestral hunters now stands atop a frost-slick ridge swathed in reindeer skin, calling silently to the northern lights. The snow beneath her boots crunches with a brittle voice, and her breath appears as a ghostly plume in the air. Hunter-gatherer descendants gather around a communal fire in a semicircle beneath the dancing aurora green and violet shimmers that could be flames conjured by a celestial sorcerer. The shaman raises her drum, its hide taut as moonlit leather, and strikes it twice, the deep resonance scattering echoes toward the infinite. Each beat conjures ancestral spirits hunters gone beyond any mortal horizon who hover in the arcade of stars. Tonight, the hunters will venture out before dawn to harvest caribou guided by the visions she stirs in their minds. They will trust her incantations, believing that the old ways hold steady even when wind turbines spin on distant ridges and smartphones light the path to new horizons. By night's end, they will return with meat for the community, carrying stories of survival bound to both firelight and algorithmic forecasts that predicted migration trails through satellite data melding ancient craft with contemporary science. In Kugluktuk, a hamlet above the Arctic Circle, where the shaman's fire dims, another caretaker emerges beneath a nearly midnight sun. A nurse practitioner, who learned from the shaman's rituals, now navigates hallways of a newly built clinic, her footsteps echoing across vinyl floors. She administers vaccines to infants whose mothers once gave birth in sod huts, her instruments a blend of modern medicine and preserved traditional remedies. She recalls how centuries ago, midwives used blood-veined sage and whispered blessings beneath stars to ensure a newborn's first breath. Tonight, she reads from a ledger that lists families expecting twins and triplets reminders that life persists even in extremes of darkness and cold. Each baby will be named under the faint glow of the sun that never truly sets their futures, nurtured by both ancestral knowledge and neonatal incubators wired to generators. As she records the latest vitals, she senses the continuity of those who stood watch before both huts and hospital wings, but the purpose remains unchanged: to protect life through the hush of night and the glare of day. In a crowded Jakarta train station, where commuters too weary for words cling to overhead straps, a paramedic named Ratna offers water and first aid to those overcome by heat exhaustion. The station's fluorescent lights flicker above a mosaic of worn faces, businessmen in polyester suits, street vendors bearing baskets of fruit, mothers cradling infants, lulled by the hum of transit. Ratna's backpack contains bandages, oral rehydration salts, and a simple chart outlining cholera risks, reminders that even in urban sprawl, medieval scourges endure in modern guise. Her shift began before dawn, tending to flood victims whose homes were submerged in monsoon storms. Now, as the station empties into the night's embrace, she polishes her stethoscope and checks her pulse, weariness pooling behind her ribs like tidal water. She pauses to offer a small prayer, recalling fathers who once rose at midnight to guard fishing boats from reefs that bore silent teeth. Her work may not heed to old-world omens, yet its spirit aligns, standing watch, mending bodies, ensuring that when another dawn arrives, her community stands a chance to greet it with strength rather than limp surrender. On the shores of the Mekong River in Vientiane, a fisherman named Somchai drifts in a small skiff beneath suspended lanterns that glow like fireflies tethered to water. Last night, he wrapped fish in bamboo leaves and sold them to floating markets before midnight. Tonight, he dips his net one final time before returning to the village where children will wake at dawn to inhale sticky rice and fish stew. As paddy paddles rest along riverbanks and temples' spired silhouettes align with a star-studded sky, Somchai hums a lullaby learned from his grandfather, words that once guided canoes away from crocodile-infested channels. In today's world, he holds a GPS device that pings his location to relatives who worry, yet he still trusts his instincts. Reading ripples, feeling the current's pull, distinguishing between wind-shaken waves and the subtle quivers of life beneath. When he finally steps ashore, he carries with him the memory of that nocturnal harmony, a reminder that for every modern contraption, there exists an ancient pulse that no machine can replicate. As the world's clockwork turns toward its next cycle, the caretaker nurse returns to children whose cheeks now flush with fever. The teacher disperses the final scholars who will sleep without worry of waterborne illness. The engineer logs off a farmer's call and extinguishes a bedside lamp. The artist seals his mural as neon signs blink off in favor of a single spotlight. The writer shuts her laptop's final word as dawn traffic hums past. The shaman folds her drum and blankets beneath layers of reclaimed knowledge. The archaeologist closes a field journal and gazes at wall relics illuminated by early morning rays. The paramedic packs her kit like a soldier stowing arms before sunrise. The fisherman hauls lanterns aboard a larger boat, preparing to land in port. They brace for the day's demands, harvest classes, clinic rounds, community meetings, all arising from the labors of the night. In that fragile threshold where first sleep approaches, they exhale with the assurance that rest is not escape, but an interlude, an offering to themselves and to the world they seek to transform. And as each eyelid falls and chest rises with the slow cadence of slumber, they join the continuum that began when shepherds first rose under lunar watch and marchers first gripped placards under gaslights, believing that every moment of wakeful purpose, however quiet or bold, threads a brighter dawn for all. Nightlight fades as gilded dawn spreads over the horizon, painting rooftops in Lisbon, Nairobi, Seoul, and beyond with a tender promise of renewal. In Lisbon's Alfama district, Maria opens the shutters of her second-floor apartment and inhales the salt-tinged breeze from the Tagus River. Last evening, she wrapped up tending to elderly neighbors whose arthritis flared whenever the coastal winds rose. She lulled them to sleep with stories of age-old remedies, vinegar rubs, sea salt baths, while lantern light trembled against the tiled walls. Now, as birds wheel overhead and church bells toll softly, she sips a thick mug of café comme lait and steps onto the cobblestones. The city hums softly. Below, laundry hangs like flags between weathered balconies, and bakers open their wood-fired ovens, wafting the scent of pão de Deus into crisp morning air. Maria's tasks await. She will gather clippings for a local newsletter promoting community gardens and interview residents about the hurricane season's lingering damage. Her pen hovers over a fresh sheet of paper as she recalls how, before the dawn, she listened for survivors in rubble, recalling ancient sagas of villagers who built dikes to keep seawater at bay. Her actions bind past to present, ensuring that each story of resilience becomes a seed for tomorrow. In Nairobi's dusty neighborhoods, Ahmed prepares for the day's market despite his fatigue. He rose before sunrise to distribute clean water leaflets under the glow of a single street lamp. As dawn's warm light spills across corrugated roofs, he packs loaves of maize bread into a worn canvas bag and heads toward Kimathi Street. Vendors arrange crates of tomatoes and kale on wooden stalls, and children weave among legs, begging for coins to buy soda. Ahmed navigates the crowd with familiarity. He knows which vendors have stockpiled safe water, which rely on rain-harvested supplies, and which families still draw from contaminated wells. His midday lesson under a mango tree still lingers in his mind, the hushed attention of mothers cradling toddlers, their eyes reflecting both gratitude and fear. Now, at market's edge, he greets them again. Kuna Maji Safi Hapa, he calls, pointing to a vendor with a blue water jug, safe water for 5 shillings a liter. As customers cluster, he knows that guiding them through choices under yesterday's dusk-born knowledge echoes the guidance ancient healers once provided by candlelight, blending science with compassion to shield communities from unseen threats. Across the world's roof, in Seoul, Ji-hoon steps from the subway into a slick corridor of fluorescent light, the hum of K-pop songs drifting from a distant cafe. Last night, he debugged an app designed to help rural farmers, mapping frost risk zones and sending SMS alerts when temperatures dipped unexpectedly. As dawn warms the streets, he sips lukewarm barley tea from a metal flask and slips on his press badge before entering a glass-walled newsroom. Editors huddle around coffee-stained tables, reviewing overnight data and headlines. Ji-hoon's segment on technological resilience, juxtaposing lunar phase algorithms with medieval lunar calendars, grabs their attention. They nod, recognizing that bridging ancestral wisdom with modern tools can spark a revolution in agricultural sustainability. He leans back, recalling how once under gaslight, villagers charted harvest dates by constellation patterns. Today, his code charts a future where farmers need only glance at their phones to outsmart frost. He offers an extra mug of tea to a bleary-eyed colleague, and they begin drafting an outline for a primetime feature that will air tonight, his efforts weaving dawn's promise into a larger tapestry of progress. Meanwhile, in Buenos Aires's colorful alleys, Marcelo wakes to the smell of dulce de leche wafting from a neighbor's open window. Last night, he painted the final lines of a mural depicting raised fists ascending against a backdrop of Rio de la Plata's silver currents. Now, as daylight nudges aside neon signs, He sets out to photograph his work in the morning light, each brushstroke glowing like embers against concrete. He sips mate tea on a chipped balcony railing before hoisting his camera bag over one shoulder. Passing tango dancers practicing beneath faded awnings, he stops to snap candid shots, the way a guitarist's fingers curve around strings a couple's feet gliding across worn cobblestones. These images, he knows, will accompany his article on how art can reclaim public spaces. When tourists stroll by and pause to gaze upward at his mural, he feels a pang of gratitude. His midnight labors now radiate across Dawn's stage, inviting passers-by to join a dialogue on justice and unity. In Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, Elena slips on a cardigan over her rumpled t-shirt and cups a hand mixer, emptying its last echo of electricity. Last evening, she drafted an exposé on storm drain runoff, a silent threat turning local creek banks into slush-filled bogs. Now, as sunbeams filter through half-closed blinds, she refills her thermos with coffee and steps onto a bus bound for the south side. The city awakens with a chorus of car horns and bicycle bells, but she auditions silence, tuning her senses to the pulse of hidden waterways. Her notebook lies open on her lap. Bulleted facts, interview notes, maps of flood-prone zones. She recalls how under the hush of night, she discovered a buried canal, a remnant of city planning doomed by profit. Today, she will present her findings to an environmental coalition, urging them to demand green infrastructure grants. She knows that what she pitched by lamplight last dusk may soon ripple through neighborhood zoning hearings protecting families far longer than dusk's embers lasted. On the Mongolian steppe, Bata strides across a frozen plain toward the communal manure pile where villagers tend winter hearths. Before sunrise, he raked droppings to fuel fires in the central Ger. Now, under pink-tufted sky, he returns to his flock of goats grazing atop sparse tufts of grass. Each bleat pierces the stillness as he collects milking pails from beneath goat hides. He remembers how last night, by firelight, he shared stories with his grandmother, tales of ancestors who tracked migrating herds under endless skies. Now, as frost dissipates in dawn's warmth, he pours fresh milk into wooden bowls toned for morning tea. He sips thoughtfully, savoring the smoky sweetness before leading his goats toward a hidden patch of tender grass. He hums a lullaby taught by his grandmother, an echo of nocturnal chants, believing that every dawn, like every herd, driven safely home, stands as testament to ancient bonds between humans and land. In Bogotá's Candelaria district, Sofia emerges from her studio loft into narrow lanes where vendors hawk arepas and coffee. Last night, she drifted behind her mural, but now daylight reveals the vivid details she framed by streetlight hummingbirds with wings like stained glass orchids curling into secret alcoves. She laces up worn sneakers and weaves through a labyrinth of market stalls, carrying rolled canvases to a community center hosting a public forum on urban art. This morning she will moderate the session, speaking on how murals can echo medieval frescoes, weaving stories into daily life, reminding communities that their histories are palettes of both joy and struggle. When children press colored chalk into their palms and sketch new images on a vacant wall, she smiles her midnight labors, now bridging past to present, instructing next generations to breathe painting into city stone. In Melbourne's inner suburbs, Dr. Priya unclasps her stethoscope and steps into the waiting room of an outpatient clinic. Before dawn, she pored over excavation reports connecting ancient midden charcoals to early human diets. Now, as her first patient, a construction worker with heat exhaustion slides onto a vinyl chair, she greets him with a gentle smile. She prescribes hydration rest and a referral to a cooling center program started last summer. She recalls how in midday's calm, she dreamed of prehistoric fish bones and shell fragments that revealed ancestors' ingenuity in harnessing rivers. Today, she draws on those lessons, advocating for sustainable city planning that honors both heritage and human health. As the corridor fills with people seeking care, parents clutching toddlers, seniors clutching prescriptions, she carries forward the wisdom she combined under lamplight, ensuring that modern lives thrive with echoes of ancient understanding. In Alaska's Brooks Range, Lena emerges from the shaman's tent as dawn's glow kisses the snow-dusted peaks. Last night, she guided a sled driver away from thin ice, her drumbeats echoing like a heartbeat against silent tundra. Now she refuels a wooden stove, stoking the fire until its warmth dances across sweat-darkened cheeks. The shaman's apprentices join her. One cradles a bundle of dried herbs, another carries a carved ivory talisman. Together, they deliver blessings at each homestead, invoking protection against bears' safe passage across ice and clarity of mind for hunters tracking caribou. As they walk, she hums the same lullaby that once echoed through her childhood yurt, believing that her nighttime visions, ancestral figures guiding her steps, still map her path through morning's snow. Each hearth that welcomes her reminds her that vigilance need not be loud. In tender chants and whispered prayers, she knits together community and cosmos, ensuring that dawn arrives with both comfort and foresight. In Jakarta, Rahmat steps off a commuter train into humid sunlight, his paramedic vest slung over one shoulder. Few hours ago, he administered vaccines at a makeshift midnight clinic set up beneath a monsoon-scarred overpass. Now, as motorcycles swarm past and vendors offer iced tea from carts, he surveys the narrow alleys and high-rise shadows. He checks the coordinates on his GPS. Next stop is a flood-affected neighborhood where families lost homes just last night. He tightens the strap on his medical kit, recalling how under the flicker of headlamps, he stitched wounds inflicted by rushing waters. Today, he will coordinate with local officials to stock emergency shelters, ensuring that when evening's rains return, no one lacks shelter or basic supplies. Each blister he tends tells a story of survival that begins in the dark. Each prescription he issues shines like a beacon for midday's battered souls. Along the Mekong River in Luang Prabang Somchai, unties his skiff from a wooden post as morning mist lifts, revealing gilded temple spires across jade waters. Last night, he soothed children's nightmares of collapsing bridges by singing lullabies passed down through generations of river guides. Now he navigates gentle currents toward floating markets bursting with ripe papayas and steaming bowls of cow soy. Merchants greet him by name, exchanging fish and rice for coffee and dried chilies. He recalls his grandfather's midnight voyages, navigating by starlight and ancestral memory to deliver supplies to isolated communities. Today, he uses a handheld sonar device to map shifting sandbars, ensuring that new boats can navigate safely. As the sun climbs, he offers Thai microscopes to local fishermen, teaching them sustainable practices that echo ancient stewardship of waterways. His dawn merges old wisdom with new technology, securing livelihoods as rivers pulse beneath both moon and sun. In Bogotá's El Poblado district, Natalia picks up her tablet and joins a virtual conference on renewable energy. Remote participants tuning in from the Amazon basin, coastal villages, and Andean peaks. Before sleep claimed her, she drafted a policy brief advocating for solar-powered microgrids in rural schools. Now, as daylight floods her workspace, she listens to a community leader describe how a turbine erected in a neighboring township lights classrooms. She recalls murmurs from midnight research, how medieval monasteries harnessed watermills to grind grain, channeling nature's flow into communal benefit. She types notes rapidly, cross-referencing climate data budgeting spreadsheets and oral histories shared by elders. By noon, she will submit her proposal to the Ministry of Environment, believing that her words forged in the quiet hush before dawn can shape policies that carry her nation toward equitable progress. As morning solidifies into day, the mosaic of awakenings stretches across continents. Maria planning community gardens in Lisbon, Ahmed guiding market buyers in Nairobi, Ji-hoon drafting a feature on rural resilience in Seoul, Marcelo photographing mural light in Buenos Aires, Elena presenting environmental findings in Chicago, Bata milking goats on Mongolian plains, Sophia moderating art forums in Bogota, Dr. Priya treating patients in Melbourne, Lena blessing hunters in Alaska, Rahmat deploying aid in Jakarta, Somchai ferrying fish along the Mekong, Natalia shaping energy policy in Bogota. Each rise from nocturnal toil into daylight tasks testifies to a timeless human rhythm that vigilance born under lamplight lantern and headlamp spans epochs and geographies. These awakenings, tethered to the steadfast heartbeat of centuries, remind us that sleep and wakefulness together compose the score of human endeavor. And as the chorus of daylight voices swells, it carries the echoes of those who first divided their nights in candlelit halls, who braved midnight chills to guard livestock, who sang beneath cathedral arches to bind souls to hope. Each person stepping into dawn's embrace bridges the distance between ancient interludes of reflection and contemporary assays of change. In that constellation of effort, every morning tasks finds its roots in the silent vigils that preceded it, reminding us that in every duty fulfilled at sunrise, the legacy of countless awakenings endures. The sun finally slips behind distant hills, pooling molten light across rooftops and riverbanks, and the world begins its nightly hum. In Dhaka, before the air cools, Rashida steps out of her crowded one-room apartment and pushes through alleyways sticky with humid exhaust. Earlier today, she dozed on a woven cot beneath a ceiling fan, whose blades drifted in a sleepy rhythm. She awoke just before dusk, muscles still stiff from caring for her grandmother through the morning's cholera cases. Now she carries a battered thermos filled with sweet tea toward the local mosque's courtyard, where volunteers assemble to distribute blankets and medicines to families uprooted by yesterday's flooding. As she weaves between rows of prayer rugs, she recalls how mothers cradled their weeping children in the midday lull, and how she kissed their foreheads, promising that help would come. Now, under strings of flickering bulbs, she sets down the thermos and kneels beside an elderly woman whose breath rasped earlier. She presses a cup to her lips and murmurs, "Rest a moment," recalling that the afternoon's short respite allowed her to serve more lives as darkness gathered. Across the Arabian Sea, in Muscat, Omar emerges from his workstation in a gleaming office tower, eyes glazed from hours of spreadsheets and blue sky simulations on water scarcity. In the afternoon lull, when the call to prayer briefly hushed traffic, you would have found him leaning against a marble column, palms pressed together, inhaling the stale air conditioning like a benediction. He drifted for minutes enough to remember that at night, fishermen rely on moonlit currents rather than dashboards. Now, as lanterns glow along the corniche, he unfolds a canvas chart that maps the migratory routes of tuna, encoded with coordinates that might reduce bycatch and protect coral spawning grounds. He sets up a makeshift desk on the promenade, clicking through satellite images on his tablet. Local anglers drift in, some smoking cigarettes, some pushing bicycles tethered with nets, and he guides them through digital overlays that shift with the moon's phases. In the shift from afternoon's rest to evening's urgency, he balances modern algorithms against ancient patterns of the sea, believing that every fish spared tonight ensures tomorrow's community remains fed. On the outskirts of Lima, a cluster of adobe homes bakes beneath lingering heat. Carla steps out of her kitchen dust dancing under her worn sandals. In the afternoon, she permitted herself a scarf-draped siesta on a low cot, her mind wandering through memories of Andean shepherds who once led flocks down cool mountain passes before the day heated. When she awoke, the smell of charcoal embers still lingered from yesterday's cooking, reminding her that evenings would soon be devoted to preparing community meals for the barrio's poorest residents. Now, as twilight ripples across the Pacific, she gathers plastic containers of rice and beans and heads to the plaza. Children cluster at her feet, their faces smeared with dust and sweetness, and she kneels to distribute bowls of soup warmed by a single propane burner. The stew bubbles in a dented pot, its spices weaving a comfort that lasts longer than any brief afternoon nap. In each grateful smile, she recognizes that the rest she claimed earlier under a threadbare blanket was as vital to her service as the meals she now dispenses under string lights that sway in the evening breeze. In Johannesburg, the city skyline's glass facades blaze with reflection as Thabo steps off a minibus taxi onto fragrant pavement dusted with jacaranda petals. He worked through most of the afternoon at a community radio station recording interviews on social entrepreneurship and microfinance. During a lull, he closed his eyes on a battered couch in the studio, enveloped by the low hum of mixing boards and the scent of brewed rooibos. He dreamed briefly of his grandfather, who once guided miners to safety beneath gas lamp glow. Now, under neon street signs, Thabo unfolds his notes on a bench near a late-night market. Vendors hawk boiled peanuts and roasted sweet corn, and he interviews them about shifting customer habits since the power outages began. His microphone picks up the vendors' voices crisp and urgent against the night air as they describe how they relied on solar lanterns to keep cooking when grid power failed. In the transition from afternoon's subdued pause to evening's electrified exchange, he weaves these stories into tomorrow's broadcast, believing that each narrative kindles understanding like embers, sustaining a communal bonfire. On the flooded plains of Bangladesh, Rashida's colleague Kareem paddles a small wooden boat toward a cluster of stilts propped above murky water. Earlier today, he had dozed on a charpoy, a woven bed of rope under a makeshift tarpaulin roof, listening to the faint hum of monsoon winds. He woke as the tide surged and families gathered their essentials to higher platforms. Now, as dusk dulls the horizon, he guides his oars through channels that barely existed a decade ago, navigating children clutching plastic buckets, mothers clutching bundles of clothes, and elder villagers balanced atop trunks. He delivers dried fish and boiled lentils, singing a lullaby his own mother sang before long nights spent fetching water by lamplight. Each recipient's grateful nod strengthens his resolve. He remembers that the nurturing rest he stole this afternoon is what allows him to steady his arms now steering toward those in need under an indifferent sky. Across the Indian Ocean in Mombasa, Aisha steps into the dim rotunda of a bustling hospital where the scent of antiseptic mingles with the salt tang of sea air seeping in through barred windows. She spent the midday break perched on a tiled ledge, her legs dangling, watching fishermen haul nets beneath a searing sun. She closed her eyes and felt the lull of the tide, dreaming of fluid rhythms as restful as breath. When she awoke, she returned her stethoscope to her neck and set about the evening's rounds assessing malaria patients, injecting antivenom for snakebite victims, and consoling mothers whose infants protested in feverish whimpers. Under the flicker of fluorescent lamps, she moves through wards like a lantern herself, illuminating hope with each measured dose, recalling that her brief respite today saved the strength she needed tonight to cradle cold bodies against unceasing humidity. In a Seoul high-rise overlooking the Han River, Ji-hoon's colleague Mina taps the touchscreen of her laptop before stepping onto the rooftop garden, where rows of microgreens sit beneath lamps powered by rooftop solar panels. During her afternoon pause, when city streets hummed rather than roared, she rested against a planter box filled with basil and chives, head heavy from coding climate models. She drifted briefly into memories of her grandmother, who once tended rooftop vegetables beside simmering rice cookers, using rainwater collection barrels to irrigate life in tight quarters. Now, as evening descends, Mina gathers freshly cut greens, aromatic crisp emerald, bundling them into biodegradable baskets destined for an inner-city food bank. As she descends into the lobby, her mind buzzes with data: how much water each plant consumed, how many meals each bouquet can brighten, and how the lull she claimed under a gentle breeze gave her the clarity to merge tradition with innovation under neon glow. On the outskirts of Cusco Andina, peasants cling to terraces zigzagging the slopes of ancient Inca trails. Mateo climbs from his midday rest, where he slept under an adobe roof, listening to alpacas' soft grunts, and readies his donkey for a journey down to the valley. His small herd brays in the distance as he loads sacks of quinoa and maize onto the animal's back. He remembers how his ancestors once distributed seeds to neighbors under flickering torchlight, ensuring no family starved when frost choked new shoots. Tonight, he will lead a caravan of traders navigating cobblestone pathways toward a candlelit plaza where townsfolk gather to barter and share choripan. Under starlit skies, he will recount ancestral chants that invoked the sun's return, and feel free to rest among friends in a communal shelter. Yet his brief repose this afternoon, cradled by the scent of earth and lightly lulled by distant panpipes, was essential, for it granted the strength to guide his donkey through mountain passes that shimmer with frost under moonlight. In a sprawling refugee camp on the edge of the Sahara Desert, Zara stokes a small fire as tents crowd the reddening horizon. Earlier, when the sun pressed down with merciless force, she lay on a woven reed mat inside a makeshift clinic, limbs heavy from dispensing antibiotics. She drifted into half-sleep, dreaming of her own children, who slept far away under metal roofs. But the lull did not last. Soon, the call of duty drew her back to her feet. Now, as dusk's cooler air wafts across the camp, she boils water and sterilizes instruments for a nighttime vaccination drive. Mothers clutch their frightened infants, and men carry jerry cans of water for the sterile syringes. Zara's hands move deftly under a single lantern, recalling the medieval healers who once mixed poultices by candlelight to stave off plague. Each injection she administers thwarts disease a moment longer, and she knows that the brief midday rest she stole under the pall of dust storms was the same grace that keeps her vigilant tonight. On the ridges of the Peruvian Andes, Rocio wraps her alpaca shawl tighter as twilight gilds snow-capped peaks. During the afternoon lull, she lay on a grassy slope, lulled by the distant echo of condors' cries, tracing patterns of terraced fields that her forebears carved into mountainsides. When she awoke, the Andes hush was replaced by the neighing of llamas stirred to graze at dusk. She gathers bundles of clay and pigments, climbing to the high chapel, where villagers will soon gather beneath prayer flags, fluttering like ribbons in mountain gusts. There, she will paint protective symbols on each child's forehead, an ancient ritual revived last century to ward off frostbite and famine. In the deepening dusk, as the chapel lanterns glow like captive stars, she recalls the solace of her afternoon rest. It gave her the clarity to render each symbol with precision, carrying forward the wisdom that at night spiritual protection can be as vital as woven blankets. Finally, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Marcus clicks send on an email piecing together grant applications for restoring native prairies. Earlier, he dozed in his small study, surrounded by pressed grasses and framed photographs of daisies and purple coneflowers. He dreamed of the prairie's pulse, a landscape once teeming with bison and sky-hued grasses that rippled like oceans. When he roused himself, he slipped on boots and waded through dawn's remaining dew toward a remnant prairie patch a few miles away. Now, in the soft evening glow, he transplants seedlings of switchgrass and prairie drop seed, each grasped between fingertips that tremble with quiet excitement. Under the starlit hush, he recalls what his grandfather taught him under kerosene lamp care for the land when no one's watching, and it will care for you when daylight comes. As he places the final bundle into the sodden earth, he feels the same ancient bond his ancestors felt. Believing that each root settled tonight sustains life through seasons yet to come, dusk gives way to midnight, and across these scattered landscapes, caretakers, dreamers, and laborers transform their brief daytime awakenings and even briefer afternoon rests into lifelines for their communities. Whether cradling infants beneath swaying fans, mapping fish migrations under lamplight, distributing meals from plastic bowls, or painting protective symbols under mountain chill, they honor an unbroken lineage of wakefulness and repose. In the hush between day's bustle and night's demands, they recognize that rest is not luxury, but a sacred pause that crystallizes purpose. And as the earth rotates toward its next cycle, each will claim another moment of sleep, knowing that the dawn which awaits them is shaped by labors both bright and dim, by silences both brief and profound. And in that continuum woven through centuries and stitched by countless hands, they remember that sleep and wakefulness are not adversaries, but partners in the human story. As your own eyelids grow heavy and you drift toward the restful husk of first sleep, carry with you the embers of those nocturnal guardians, the gentle hum of midday's lull, the whispered prayers of lantern-lit wards, the echo of ancestral chants beneath mountain stars, reminders that every moment of wakeful devotion seeds a dawn more just, more vibrant, and more alive than we yet dare to dream. The first pale streaks of dawn light unfurl across a world still hushed by nocturnal labors. In Dhaka, as the sky shifts from indigo to slate, Rashida gently guides her grandmother back to their cot. The blankets, still heavy with last night's humidity, cling to faded floral sheets. Earlier, under the mosque's flickering bulbs, she kept vigil over families displaced by flooding, distributing tea and blankets until the hour when even lamplight seemed too frail to ward off chill. Now, as roosters stir on rooftops, she whispers a prayer of thanks for another night's strength, smoothing her grandmother's silver hair before rising to prepare a simple breakfast of lentils and rice. Outside, rickshaw bells clash with the first prayers echoing from minarets. She steps into narrow lanes, slick with early dew, balancing a basket of boiled eggs atop her head for neighbors who wait beside half-lit lanes. Each step, guided by memory of midnight nursing, carries her toward families whose dawn hunger cannot wait, just as medieval caretakers rose from first sleep to stoke embers and feed children before sunrise. Across the Arabian Sea, Omar watches the Corniche's lanterns fade into morning glare. He spent last evening plotting migratory tuna routes in hopes of sparing coral reefs from overfishing. As lantern light gave way to deep shadows, local fishermen clustered around his tablet, absorbing overlays of moon phase algorithms that predicted currents and tides. Now, before the market stalls fully awaken, he strides to a narrow inlet where small dhows bob like waiting ghosts. He greets fishermen by name, Mahmoud Salil and Anwar, each hauling nets heavy with last night's catch. He shows them by the light of a single sparrow's song how to adjust net placements to avoid juvenile fish. Their eyes shine with gratitude. A gentle nod replaces the harsh bartering that stokes competition. As the sun rises, painting the water rose, and Gold Omar recalls how medieval mariners lit lanterns at sea to guide vessels through hidden shoals. Today, his digital lantern's algorithms humming beneath screens serve the same purpose, ensuring that communities remain fed without destroying the sea's fragile balance. On Lima's outskirts, Carla emerges from her adobe kitchen to greet the day's first bird songs. Last night, under splintered street lamps, she stood in the plaza offering bowls of soup to families huddled around makeshift fires, the smoke curling into humid air. Now, as a gentle breeze stirs colorful prayer flags overhead, she scoops hot cha de manzanilla into chipped mugs and offers them to neighbors whose homes still lack running water. She moves toward a cluster of clay-walled houses where children open sleep-blurred eyes, their dreams lingering in rose-colored haze. "Buenos dias," she murmurs, pressing warm mugs into their small hands. Each comforting sip echoes medieval midwives' lullabies, spoken beside hearths to soothe fevered bodies before dawn chores. Carla pauses in the hush before activity awakens, recalling how that brief rest beneath an adobe roof gifted her the clarity and compassion needed to serve through the chill of night. Now, as roosters crow across terrace fields, she folds a blanket over her shoulders and sets off toward the community garden, where seedlings await her tender care. In Johannesburg's lavender-tinged early light, Thabo pads across the studio floor of the community radio station. Last night, he lay on a battered couch among cables and mixing boards, dreaming of ancestors who once gathered under gas lamp glow to share stories before the sun rose. He awoke to the hum of a generator, announcing that studios were already alight. Now, as he steps into the control room, he hears engineers tuning frequencies preparing for dawn broadcasts that will carry stories of economic hardship and triumph to townships beyond city limits. Thabo unclips his notes on microfinance interviews, scribbled in the margins of a battered notebook. He cues music mbakanga rhythms that wove through streets long before modern skyscrapers. Each verse he selects carries echoes of resistance and community, a lineage stretching back to times when evenings were occupied by candlelit gatherings, and the simple act of sharing a story could galvanize change. As the first callers pick up phones to request airtime, he feels the same hum of purpose that guided medieval scribes believing that words spoken before dawn can shape the day ahead. On the flooded plains of rural Bangladesh, Karim's small wooden boat glides through channels carved by last monsoon rains. Last night, he ferried families to higher ground beneath a half-hidden moon, singing ancient lullabies to soothe frightened children. In the pale morning light, he nudges the canoe toward a cluster of bamboo stilt houses where survivors emerge bleeding sleep from narrow hammocks. Mothers kneel on woven mats, dabbing foreheads with cool cloths, while fathers lift sodden bundles from beneath thatched floors. Karim hands out jerrycans of boiled water, each glug echoing medieval rituals of drawing fresh supplies before dawn. He kneels beside a makeshift water filter, guiding eager hands to clinch cloth taut over mud layers. A simple method borrowed from ancestors who purified river water by hem of linen. As the first prayer call drifts across open fields, he recalls how his midday nap under a palm frond, taken between long afternoon patrols, gifted him the steadiness needed to navigate turbulent channels by night. Today, he will meet with relief workers to map out next week's supply drops, ensuring that families remain safe until winter's rains recede. In Mombasa, Aisha emerges from the hospital's neon glow to inhale the salt-sweet air of dawn. Last evening, she moved between wards under fluorescent lamps, administering anti-venom and comfort to scorpion-stung patients, recalling how medieval healers carried poultices by candlelight to treat similarly venomous bites. Now as dawn splashes coral hues across ocean-facing windows, she dons sandals and strides toward a small rooftop garden she helped cultivate. Rows of medicinal herbs, aloe vera neem, and lemongrass shimmer with dew. She plucks fresh leaves and roots, bundling them into woven baskets bound with raffia. By first light, she will prepare teas and ointments for villagers who trust both modern medicine and age-old herbal wisdom. Each rustle of leaves under her fingers echoes the soft hush of lantern-lit apothecaries, where healers once blended potions for nighttime relief. As the muezzin's call to prayer drifts on the breeze, Aisha inhales deeply, savoring the fragile interlude between night's labors and day's demands, knowing that each dawn's cure honors both contemporary science and ancestral rites. In Seoul's hazy dawn, Mina descends from the rooftop garden, where she tended microgreens beneath solar lamps. Last night, she balanced her laptop on a crate of basil coating irrigation schedules for community farms that rely on minimal water. As violet light filters through smog-softened skies, she gathers aromatic bundles, cilantro mint, and scallions, tucking them into a hand-woven cloth. Later, she will board a bus bound for an inner-city food bank, where she and volunteers will prepare hundreds of meals for homeless individuals. In her satchel sits a laminated note listing ancient Korean herbal remedies for colds recipes she learned from her grandmother. She recalls how centuries ago, villagers burned mugwort beneath eaves to ward off winter chills. Today, she plans to brew mugwort tea for families facing seasonal illnesses. Each step through slick sidewalks echoes medieval pilgrimages to temples. At dawn journeys made to secure both spiritual and physical nourishment. As street vendors ignite their stalls, she pauses to breathe in a moment of calm, letting the memory of her afternoon's rest beneath a bamboo canopy when she briefly dozed. Listening to cicadas anchor her through the day's rising tide of need. On the terraced slopes above, Cusco Mateo emerges from a rough-hewn stone cottage as condors wheel overhead. Last night, by flickering candlelight, he loaded his donkey for a midnight caravan carrying sacks of quinoa and maize to valley markets, whose lamps glowed like distant stars. By dawn, he arrives at a mountain pass where traders from neighboring hamlets gather to exchange seeds and sturdier tools. He greets them with proud nods, recalling how his grandmother once stored seeds in clay pots to survive lean seasons. Now, as he distributes small burlap bags of heirloom beans to eager farmers, he recites ancient Inca blessings under his breath, believing that every kernel planted at dawn carries the promise of life. He recalls how his midday rest, spent under an ageless shawl of woven alpaca wool, filled his lungs with high-altitude air, gifting him steadiness to guide his donkey along frost-cracked trails. In this quiet morning light, he understands that each seed he hands over is a spark of resiliency rooted in soil and song alike. In a makeshift clinic near the Sahara's edge, Zara rises from her straw mat as the desert's pink dawn spills across distant dunes. Last night, under the harsh glare of headlamps, she vaccinated children against cholera, each prick of the needle echoing medieval nights when healers moved between villages by torchlight to halt plagues. Now, as a soft wind sweeps across shifting sands, she tends to ailing elders, pressing cool cloths to hot foreheads and murmuring healing incantations inherited from her mother. As the sky brightens, she kneels beside a clay jar of purified water and offers it to a young mother whose baby clings to her breast. Each sip the infant takes resonates with ancestral lullabies once sung beneath palm trees to soothe fevered dreams. Zara's own limbs ache from hours spent crouched on the sand, but memories of her afternoon's rest when she dozed beneath a patchwork tarp fortify her spirit. Today, she will consult with aid workers to secure solar panels, hoping that future clinics rely less on flickering lamps and more on renewable energy to bridge the darkness. High in the Peruvian Andes, Rocio steps from her chapel's flickering lanterns into chill dawn air. Last night, by a single oil lamp, she painted protective symbols on children's foreheads, symbols meant to keep frostbite at bay and guide animals safely through mountain passes. Now, as swirling mists reveal terraced fields carved by ancestors, she gathers stray bundles of dried llama dung to rekindle hearth fires at village cookstoves. She hums the same lullaby she sang beneath flickering torches, a hymn of gratitude for land that sustains and challenges. By sunrise, she will join weavers in the communal plaza, weaving alpaca wool into blankets destined for families still shivering from last winter's chill. Each loop of yarn she pulls reminds her of medieval spinners who wove tapestries by candlelight, their fingers dancing beneath golden glow. Today, she witnesses how threads of tradition bind communities each warp and weft a testament to perseverance against the cold. In Kalamazoo, Michigan, Marcus lifts his gaze from the prairie patch he cultivated yesterday to meet dawn's pastel glow. Last night, by flashlight under his field journal's yellowed pages, he charted native grasses and sketched restoration plans for a battered wetland. Now, as a soft breeze ripples through emerging switchgrass, he kneels to plant fresh seedlings in quaking soil, remembering how his grandfather once relied on moonlit surveys to track waterfowl's return. Each root he nestles into earth hums with possibility, inviting songbirds and pollinators to return. As he brushes soil from his jeans, he recalls how his brief afternoon reverie under shade of an oak tree revealed patterns in water runoff that no map could depict. Today, he will present grant proposals to City Council, urging them to fund green corridors that echo ancestral prairies. In every blade that unfurls at dawn, he hears echoes of that ancient pulse, the pulse of life, resisting oblivion under both moon and sun. Across these waking worlds, Dhaka's narrow lanes, Muscat's calm harbor, Lima's sunlit plazas, Johannesburg's airwaves, Bangladesh's stilt villages, Mombasa's rooftop gardens, Seoul's rooftop farms, Cusco's high passes, Sahara's sand-swept clinics, Andes' terraced slopes, and Michigan's prairie scents, dawn emerges as a bridge between yesterday's nocturnal toil and tomorrow's unfolding stories. Each caretaker, healer, farmer, and artist rises from darkness bearing gifts of insight, born in midnight's hush lessons gleaned from medieval nights when vigilance meant survival from ancestral songs that guided travelers by firelight from innovations forged in the quiet of headlamps. Their footsteps in dawn's soft soil plant seeds of hope, of health, of justice, of sustenance, reminding us that every sunrise carries the echoes of those who kept watch when slumber threatened to silence purpose. As you open your eyes and greet this new day, let the memory of their dawns guide you. For in each breath taken beneath pale morning skies, we honor a legacy that stretches from the first ember lit in a thatched cottage to the glowing screen tracking migratory fish across the night's expanse. Whether your morning begins with a whispered prayer or the hum of a coffee maker, remember that your waking carries forward an ancient story, one in which every deliberate step ignites the ember of a brighter day. The world turns slowly into light, as if pausing to gather breath before the next heartbeat. In Kathmandu's winding alleys, Sita lifts clay pots from a vendor's cart and balances them on her head before the sun reaches its zenith. Last night, she lingered under lamplight in the family courtyard, sifting through dried herbs for an herbalist's apprentice who treats fevered children after midnight. Now, as cranes hoist construction materials for a new school, she threads through the crowd, aware that her careful steps echo those of ancestors who at first light brewed decoctions from mountain blooms. Each measured movement through dusty streets carries both memory and promise, a silent pledge to honor the land that cradles her city before the bustle of day disgorges commuters from painted buses. Across the Mediterranean, in Palermo's Baroque quarter, Lorenzo emerges from frescoed catacombs where he spent the small hours under candle glow studying centuries-old inscriptions. He traces chipped carvings with a calloused fingertip letters that whispered secrets of medieval masons who built vaults to channel night's cool into stone. When dawn's first warmth filters through wrought iron grills, he rolls a canvas of replicated glyphs onto a wooden stretcher and makes his way to the city archive. Here by lamplight and laptop screen, he digitizes fragile parchment, ensuring that long-forgotten chronicles survive beyond crumbling bindings. This morning, he will present his findings at a local symposium, showing how nocturnal scholars once preserved knowledge by the flicker of oil lamps. In each pixelated scan, he hears the murmurs of distant monks who rose before dawn to copy texts by candle flame, an unbroken charge passed into his hands as he steps into the soft glow of morning's new day. Farther east, in the neon-pooled streets of Tokyo, Aiko slips through sliding doors into a tiny calligraphy studio. Last night, she practiced kanji under the glow of a red-tipped desk lamp. Her brush strokes fluid despite the late hour. The scrolls she created depict haiku about moonlit rice paddies and echo the subtle curves of characters first inked by medieval poets writing beneath paper lanterns. Now, as dawn's white light floods paper screens, she rinses her brushes and hangs finished scrolls for patrons to admire. In a few hours, her teacher will guide her to the tea house, where she will demonstrate the art of brush dance to curious foreigners. Each sweep of ink into rice paper this morning echoes the silent discipline of ancestors who believed that creating beauty under night's hush prepared the soul for the day's harmony. Aiko steps back to appreciate her work, satisfied that the quiet of yesterday's night has birthed tableau for today's admiration. In the rain-drenched suburbs of Vancouver, Eldon pads across soggy grass toward a soccer pitch where dew clings like beads of memory. He spent the overnight hours coaching youth players beneath stadium lights, guiding them through drills designed to sharpen reflexes against projection boards that simulate game day pressure. As dawn's softened sky lightens cloud banks, he pauses to watch a robin strike minnows from a puddle, unaware that it echoes his own patient vigilance. Today, he will host a free clinic for underfunded kids, teaching not only footwork, but resilience forged when sleep is traded for practice. His nights once mirrored medieval watchmen who stood guard over village boundaries, ensuring safe passage for travelers. Now, his presence on the damp field ensures that a new generation can chase both a leather ball and their dreams under sunlit skies. Across the Pacific, on a windswept reef off Fiji's coast, Lydia emerges from thatch roof bungalows and follows tidal pools that glint like broken glass in morning light. Yesterday's night she spent documenting coral bleaching under the muted shimmer of underwater flashlights, each dive revealing silent transformations that threaten entire ecosystems. This dawn, she pulls on a dry robe and wades into shallows to tag juvenile reef fish with micro GPS trackers. The ocean's gentle hush at sunrise reminds her of medieval fishermen who navigated by starlight and the learned murmurs of waves against sand. Each measured stroke as she swims toward sheltered drop-offs carries hope rooted in nocturnal exploration that knowing the reef's secrets at night may guide strategies to protect it in the harsh glare of day. As she surfaces, salt clings to her eyelashes, and the horizon undulates with possibility, as though the sea itself breathes with relief at her vigilant care. In Lagos's sprawling markets, Emeka rises from a narrow cot he shared with his younger brother, the sheets still warm from last night's vigil, when he organized a lantern-lit protest demanding equitable access to clean water. He remembers how they marched beneath feverish streetlights, banners raised high, chanting lines taught by their father, words passed down from activists who once rallied under gaslight for voting rights. Now, as the first heat of day settles onto corrugated rooftops, he slings a canvas bag filled with chalk onto his shoulders. He heads toward a school huddle to teach chalk tag basketball, a makeshift game he invented to spark community unity. Each bounce of the ball against uneven pavement echoes the drumbeat of solidarity that once galvanized laborers in their quest for fair wages. Emeka's footsteps through dusty lanes carry yesterday's determination into today's play, reminding each child that joy, born of struggle, seeds brighter tomorrows. In a remote stretch of Siberia, Nadia stumbles out of a government research station, snow crunching beneath her insulated boots, as dawn unfurls silver shadows across frost-crusted firs. Last night, she monitored seismographs for tremors that might signal permafrost destabilization, a peril first glimpsed on old maps drawn by Russian explorers by flickering kerosene lamps. Now, as pale light suffuses the horizon, she rigs solar-powered sensors to chart seasonal thaw patterns. A black bear leaves footprints near her lab's threshold, and Nadia remembers how medieval trackers in northern forests interpreted animal trails as harbingers of shifting seasons, a practice that underpins her own scientific protocols. Each data point she collects in the morning feeds into global climate models, ensuring that insights gleaned in darkness guide policymakers by daylight. In hoisting her pack for an afternoon trek, she carries both electronic probes and ancestral wisdom, trusting that knowledge harvested under starlit skies will map a safe passage for humanity's future. In São Paulo's graffiti-spangled underpasses, Julio steps onto a makeshift stage erected at dawn for a spoken-word performance. Last night he spent hours composing verses under the dim flicker of a studio lamp, each line a tribute to grandparents who sang samba with lanterns during long curfews. This morning's echoes of traffic blend with his resonant voice as he recites stanzas promoting urban renewal. His words ripple across a crowd of early morning commuters, inviting them to envision neighborhoods where murals replace broken facades. He closes his set with a refrain learned from a medieval troubadour's lament that art entrusted to the dark takes flight in the light. As applause swells beneath concrete arches, Julio knows that night's creative crucible transformed into a catalyst for civic change under the gentle drum of morning hum. In a pebbled riverbank outside Budapest, Clara kneels on a mossy stone to rinse dried pigments from her hands. Last night, she joined a circle of visual artists painting river goddesses under torches, each stroke meant to honor water spirits believed to safeguard fishermen's nets. Now, as sunrise gilds the Danube's rippling surface, she surveys her oil-on-canvas mural propped against a wooden easel. The painting's deep blues and shimmering silvers capture the river's pulse, a tribute to medieval artisans who integrated holy motifs into cathedral windows using colored glass to teach communities at dawn. Visitors drift ashore, joggers, cyclists, curious tourists, and Clara explains how her nocturnal ritual of painting beneath torchlight informed the mural's luminescence. Each reflection on the water's surface mirrors medieval lessons that beauty shaped in darkness offers guidance when daylight arrives. In Rio de Janeiro's favelas, Miguel scrapes fresh white primer on a brick wall as dawn's first glow sculpts Sugarloaf Mountain in pink. Last night, he and a team of volunteers repainted damaged public murals under the glow of flashlights reclaiming images that once uplifted residents during power outages. Now, as the city awakens with samba rhythms drifting from windows, he dips a brush into cerulean paint and restores a mural of intertwined hands. He remembers how ancestors spent nights in communal gatherings beneath oil lamps, weaving tapestries that depicted unity in the face of hardship. Each stroke this morning bridges that legacy to present-day resilience. That public art can both heal and inspire when painted under night's hush. As passers-by stop to watch, Miguel catches an older woman's gaze, offering her a brush so she can retouch a broken line of color, an act that mirrors medieval villagers repairing stained glass panes before Sunday worship. Finally, in a slender apartment above London's Thames, Sophie slips on slippers and checks her smartwatch for the 5:47 a.m. train. Last evening, she transcribed letters unearthed in archives, whispers of suffragettes who plotted by the light of coal-fired lamps, translating dense script into digital text. Now, as Big Ben's bells toll 6, she packs her laptop into a tote emblazoned with a quill and ink pot. Today, she will present research on overlooked female cartographers at the British Library, shining light on those who charted territories under flickering lanterns when women's work was confined to hearth and home. Each step she takes through cobbled streets echoes medieval scribes who guarded knowledge in candlelit halls, ensuring that history's margins did not erase their contributions. As she descends into the tube, she imagines her lecture as a beacon for aspiring scholars that diligence pursued in darkness blossoms into recognition when readied by daylight. As morning unfurls across cities, villages, and wildernesses, these caretakers, creators and custodians of memory, emerge from nights woven in lamplight lantern glow and the gentle hum of modern screens. They carry forward traditions born beneath flickering candles and mesh them with innovations that guide contemporary lives. Whether rowing boats beneath star-strewn skies, painting murals under neon's afterglow, or decoding ancient tomes beside a coffee's first steam, each person steps into day with embers of the night's work glowing within. And as you awaken, no matter where you stand, when dawn colors your window, know that your rising continues that same lineage, that awakening is not merely the end of sleep, but the renewal of purpose, a deliberate step in an unbroken story where every action kindles a brighter day. Late morning light lingers on a Himalayan pass where Sherpa guides splay fresh produce on weathered prayer flags for the day's travelers. Tenzin steps from a cluster of stone stupas, his boots scuffing loose gravel, as he arranges crates of rosy apples and crisp cabbage beneath the sun's gentle gaze. Earlier, he rose with prayer bells tinkling, having tended to trekking permits by flickering candlelight in a high-altitude tea house. Now he offers fruit to porters laden with heavy loads of supplies bound for Everest Base Camp. With each apple he hands over, he recalls how his ancestors once shared barley cakes before sunrise, fueling climbers who risked frostbite to map peaks seen only under starlit skies. As pilgrims pause to sip butter tea, warmed by yak dung fires, Tenzin's midday offering becomes a bridge between ancestral hospitality and the relentless demands of high-altitude livelihoods. In Accra, Ghana, the sun rides high in a cobalt sky as Amma navigates a dusty alley to deliver handheld ultrasound machines to a rural clinic. Yesterday's dawn found her scribbling patient data under a single kerosene lamp, her fingers stained by ink and soot. Now she threads through throngs of market-goers, hawking dried fish and vibrant kente cloth. The heat presses against her as she weaves care packages into waiting baskets, prenatal vitamins, reusable blood pressure cuffs, and solar-powered lights intended to replace lanterns that once guided midwives through midnight births. Each step carries the echo of Edo-era healers who once carried calabash bowls under moonlight, seeking out expectant mothers tucked beneath thatched roofs. At the clinic, children cluster around the devices with wide eyes, marveling at screens that promise glimpses of unborn siblings. Amma's presence under the midday sun transforms ancient midwifery wisdom into modern-day empowerment. Across the Pacific in Yakutat, Alaska tidal flats stretch out toward snow-swathed peaks beneath a porcelain sky. As the sun edges toward its zenith, Aki paddles a weathered wooden canoe through glassy channels to set crab pots near kelp beds. This morning, she rows in the communal fish camp after tending to seabird counts under headlamp glow, her notes scrawled by lantern on notebook margins. Now, as gulls wheel overhead, she hoists each pot aboard the rhythmic tug of buoy lines, reminding her of ancestral fishermen who once seized salmon from icy waters under church bell tolls before sunrise. She packs crabs into insulated buckets for elders who await them at the longhouse, where journeys of mid-morning prayers transition into midday feasts celebrating the ocean's abundance. Each tangled rope, each creel of crustaceans ties her modern day to a lineage of subsistence shaped by both ice and fire. In Havana's Plaza de la Revolucion, midday traffic hums beneath the watchful gaze of Che's steel visage atop the Ministry of the Interior. Sylvia navigates peeling sidewalks to deliver hand-stitched community newsletters to elderly residents of a nearby housing block. Before dawn, she had sketched illustrations by candlelight, a lineup of Malecon fishermen sugarcane cutters and pediatric nurses rendered in charcoal lines. Now, as coqui frogs call from hidden gardens, she threads paper bundles beneath doorways, reminding neighbors of a midday literacy workshop and an evening film screening about local environmental struggles. Each newsletter folded beneath a door harks back to how clandestine pamphleteers once slipped revolutionary manifests under moonlit streets, their work carried out with hushed breath and silent steps. Today's printed pages, adorned with social justice slogans and health tips, serve as modern lanterns, illuminating minds in a city where resources remain tight, but solidarity burns bright. In Mumbai's sprawling Dharavi district, midday sun filters through corrugated rooftops onto labyrinthine lanes of brick and mortar. Ramesh steps onto a narrow balcony, summoning workers for a brief pause from garment stitching, a task begun by candlelit kerosene lamps before dawn. He hoists a battered brass pot of chai onto a makeshift table, the aroma of ginger and spices weaving through the hum of sewing machines. Tailors clutch chipped mugs as steam blurs their vision, their soot-smeared faces etched with concentration and fatigue. Ramesh recalls how generations ago his grandmother pounded mortar for relief huts under moonlight after cyclones, expecting laborers to return at first light to rebuild crumbled walls. Now, as midday dancers from the street below dip into discarded plastic bags to extract scraps, Ramesh offers chai as both comfort and a reminder that rest among relentless industry fuels the resilience needed for long hours tucked between dawn and dusk. Across Andean ridges in Lima Paracas National Reserve, Renzo steers a canvas-hulled boat from shore, shifting through turquoise waters toward a kelp forest teeming with marine life. His crew readies diving gear beneath the sun's fierce glare, having charted migratory routes of sea lions by moonlight only hours before. Now, as tourists drift ashore for midday tours, Renzo and his fellow biologists descend into swaying fronds, collecting water samples to monitor changing pH levels. They recall coastal ancestors who navigated currents by observing seabird flight patterns before sunrise, a living tradition that persists in each adjustment of their scuba masks and regulator checks. After surfacing, Renzo rigs solar panels on deck to recharge underwater drones, marrying ancestral knowledge with cutting-edge technology under the same sun that once guided pre-Incan fishermen to anchorage. Every buoy flagged and every sample jar sealed binds past explorations to future conservation. In Mexico City, beneath a sky freckled with smog, Elena strides through Zocalo to reach a school tucked behind colonial churches. Earlier, she mapped trauma-informed yoga poses on parchment by lamplight, recalling how convent nuns centuries ago used prayer to soothe war-orphaned children. Now, as midday's railroad thin air hums across plaza stones, she kneads soft mats into a circle in a sunlit courtyard. Children emerge, faces bright with curiosity and hunger for solace, and she guides them through gentle stretches that echo both ancestral Aztec flows and contemporary therapeutic practice. Each inhale they take recalls breath rituals passed down in hushed temples before first light. Each exhale carries away fragments of city noise, offering a rare moment of stillness beneath the midday glare. Elena's midday ministry knits ancient spiritual care to modern psychological needs, affirming that healing rooted in breath transcends both time and tumult. On the banks of the Seine in Paris, midday light dances across cafe tables lining cobblestone quays. Jacques sets out wicker baskets of freshly printed leaflets for a lunchtime assembly in the Latin Quarter. Last night, he had edited underground poetry by flickering street lamp, transcribing verses of existential longing penned by students during curfew. Now, as midday rush crescendos around him, he calls passers-by to join a forum on affordable housing, an echo of 1960s sit-ins staged under gaslight. Each leaflet, slipped into a tote or coat pocket, serves as a modern talisman inviting citizens to carry ideas from public squares into City Hall. As trumpets signal the return of riverboats and bicycles weave through hemmed-in traffic, Jacques exalts the lineage of voices that rose when darkness failed to silence protest, ensuring that midday's assembly reflects both civic urgency and centuries of communal gathering. Over in Sydney's Blue Mountains, sunlight flickers through eucalyptus canopies onto mossy pathways. Marigold emerges from a research station, where she spent the night auditing nocturnal calls of endangered lyrebirds under recording microphones. Now, as the sun warms dew-laden ferns, she treks to a neighboring sanctuary to release juvenile platypuses into cooled streams, each bundled in soft cloth like a secret gift. She leans over to lower them gently, remembering how colonial naturalists once tracked platypuses by torchlight, believing their discovery bridged earth and myth. Today, as she cradles wet puggles in her arms, she connects that faint heartbeat echoing beneath a moonlit forest to the shimmering flicker of midday water, sanctifying every ripple as a promise that life's fragile pulse can survive both night's hush and day's glare. In Lagos's creek-lined Oshodi market, midday's symphony of horns and hawkers swells to a frenetic pitch. Yet Kazim threads through narrow passages, carrying a cooler box of vaccination vials, heading toward a makeshift clinic erected beneath a canopy of tarps. Yesterday, he mapped cholera outbreak patterns by candlelight mapping retrieval routes across flooded streets. Now, as midday heat presses down on the corrugated steel roofs, he dons gloves and guides volunteers in swift immunizations, each injection a bulwark against disease that once plundered villagers under shrouded nights. Mothers clutch singing infants, willing arms that once trembled under the threat of illness, now steady as Kasim's needle pierces small skins. About him, market life surges and retreats in waves, but within the clinic's tarp walls, a hushed order prevails, a modern echo of ancestral healers who labored by moonbeam to protect communities too weary for dawn. As he logs each name into a battered ledger, Kasim feels the same resolute calm that comes from turning midnight maps into midday medicine, stitching care into the fabric of urban life. In Barcelona's Ciutat Vella, midday crowds swirl past wrought iron balconies and pastel facades. Isabella steps from a narrow lane into a sunlit plaza, her crate of loaves and pastries warming in woven straw. Before dawn, she baked bread in a wood-fired horno, recalling how Moorish bakers once tended to clay ovens under lanterns, coaxing dough into sustenance for families asleep in courtyard dwellings. Now, as midday sunshine glints off tile mosaics, she sets out panes of garlic-infused focaccia and buñuelos dusted with cinnamon sugar, offering them to neighbors whose midday hunger cannot wait. Children cluster at her side, fingers outstretched, faces alight with the promise of flavor. Each loaf she sells ties the quiet discipline of night's baking to the communal vibrancy of midday sales, passing nourishment from her hearth to tables, where families gather to share both bread and conversation. In Bogotá's Candelaria, midday's golden haze filters through colonial arches onto weathered cobbles. Javier emerges from the Universidad Nacional's library with a stack of research journals on Andean water rights articles he proofread by lamplight during last night's vigil for climate justice. As midday traffic hums beneath towering spires, he settles at a street cafe and spreads maps across a wrought iron table, plotting community irrigation projects to combat rural dry spells. Farmers drift by hands stained with earth, pausing to ask how modern sensors can recycle mountain runoff into parched valleys. Javier recalls Inca engineers who once channeled hillside springs into terraced fields under the same sun now bright above him. With each line he draws and each farm he visits, he merges ancestral water wisdom with contemporary advocacy, ensuring that midday's research transforms into afternoon's tangible progress. In Montreal's Plateau Mont-Royal, midday's bustle flows down Saint Laurent Boulevard in waves of vinyl record stores and coffee shops. Nadine ambles from a sound studio where she spent the overnight hours mastering tracks for a communal protest anthem. Now, as midday light filters through stained glass windows of a nearby church, she presses vinyl discs into eager hands, inviting listeners to gather for an evening march. Each record's crackle carries both the hiss of analog warmth and the acquired edge of midnight's creative crucible. Listeners applaud cradling hot lattes and novel manuscripts, eager for the blending of sound and purpose. Nadine's presence here under midday's soft glare resonates with a lineage tracing back to medieval minstrels who carried verses by torchlight to chiseled squares, tipping tales of justice into song. In each note shared, she kindles anticipatory fire for dusk's gathering, ensuring that midday's rhythms morph into a chorus of imminent solidarity. As the sun tilts across hemispheres offering midday's zenith and afternoon's promise, these figures Tenzin on Himalayan passes Amma in Accra's clinics, Aki along Alaska's seas, Sylvia in Palermo's archives, Aiko at Tokyo's calligraphy desk, Eldon on Vancouver's Pichilitia in Fiji's reefs, Emeka in Lagos's protests, Nadia in Siberia's tundra, Julio on Sao Paulo's stages, Clara by the Danube, Miguel in Rio's favelas, Sophie on London's tube, and now Tenzin's trekkers move through their hours with intentional grace. Each midday endeavor springs from nocturnal labor herbs sorted by lantern light data archived beneath candle glow, watercolor pigments mixed under desk lamps. From afternoon's sun to evening's ascent, their work spins the continuum of human devotion across time and terrain. And as they pour, chai program algorithms harvest marine data, digitize manuscripts, paint murals, counsel children, track crab pots, craft newsletters, and plot irrigation. They embody the ancient rhythm that every midday effort is seeded by those who first learned to see in darkness. As shadows lengthen toward afternoon's gentle hush, they prepare to transition into evening's tasks, ensuring that the tapestry woven from dusk-bound diligence unfurls into every new dawn. The golden hour settles across continents with a slow, deliberate grace, transforming the world's rhythms as day shifts toward night. In the dusty lanes of Kathmandu, merchants who peddled morning produce beneath fluttering prayer flags now begin packing crates of apples and cabbages into weathered wooden carts to head home. Tenzin, who spent the late morning distributing fruit to Everest porters in reliance on ancestral tradition, pauses on a stony ledge overlooking the valley. He watches the sky ripple from pale blue to amber as the setting sun ignites the snow-capped peaks with molten light. At his side sits a weather-beaten prayer wheel, its metal dulled by countless turns of devotion. He twirls it through his fingertips, invoking blessings for both porters and pilgrims who will soon settle by lamplit stoves, their evening meals echoing the simple barley cakes once shared at dawn. As dusk approaches, he loads baskets into a donkey's saddle, preparing to guide the animal home through narrow switchbacks before darkness fully envelops the mountains. Thousands of miles away, in Accra's vibrant streets, Amma shoulders a satchel brimming with handheld ultrasound machines and solar lanterns. During the afternoon heat, she delivered them to a rural clinic connecting modern prenatal care with buried knowledge passed down by Edo-era healers. Now, as twilight seeps into alleyways lined with kente cloth stalls, she convenes a small gathering of midwives under the soft glow of battery-powered bulbs. The women sit on woven mats beneath a generous baobab tree, its trunk carved with symbols of fertility and protection. Amma teaches them how to operate the portable devices, a gift that promises to save lives beyond the briefest flickers of daylight. She recalls how her own grandmother once braved moonlit nights to tend expectant mothers guided only by calabash lamps, and faith that secret herbs could stave off mortal danger. As the chirp of cicadas blends with children's laughter drifting from a nearby courtyard, Amma feels the tug of both past and future in her chest, a reminder that the same hands once kneading eucalyptus poultices now coax healing from digital screens. In Yakutat, Alaska, where the afternoon sun lingers like liquid gold over the glacier-carved fjords, Aki steers her canoe homeward crab pots secured at its stern. The tidal flats, once teeming with foraging seabirds, now reflect a sky tinged with rose and violet. This morning's work setting pots beneath kelp forests, guided by headlamp beams and ancestral instincts, has given way to evening reflections on salt-scented air and rumbling tide. As she approaches the longhouse, she spots elders crouched around a fire pit, smoke rising in steady spirals against the dusky haze. They nod in greeting, and she lifts her arms to display a full creel of Dungeness crab's gifts for the communal feast. The children rush forward, squealing with delight, their mittens too small to hide from the chill drifting in with the breeze. Aki sets the buckets down with gentle care, and together they stoke the coals beneath a polished steel pot, the sound of bubbling broth immediately beckoning hungry tongues. She recalls how forebears once hauled salmon beneath lantern-lit canoes, storing fresh catches for winter's darkness. Tonight's gathering carries that same legacy, a testament that food harvested under starry skies still warms hearts when daylight has finally waned. In Havana's Plaza de la Revolucion, the mid-afternoon haze is replaced by long shadows cast from rust-red facades and the giant steel visage of Che Guevara. Sylvia navigates the emptying sidewalks, her arms cradling armfuls of hand-stitched newsletters, evidence of hours spent sketching under flickering candlelight. As twilight spreads its indigo veil across the sky, she slips the bundles beneath faded wooden doors of elderly neighbors, leaving behind calls to gather at a literacy workshop planned for the following noon. Before darkness claims the square, she finds a quiet bench near a monumental statue, sometimes joining pilgrims who kneel in contemplation beneath the glow of street lamps. Tonight, a small cluster of activists will meet beneath the statue's watchful stare, planning a grassroots effort to protect coastal mangroves from development. Sylvia reflects on how clandestine pamphleteers once slipped revolutionary manifests beneath moonlit streets. Their courage echoed now in her evening's work, birthing hope through shared words. As stars emerge overhead, she tucks her sketches and pamphlets into a battered satchel and steps into an alley where a single street lamp flickers like a trembling promise, ready to guide her home through Havana's glowing heart. Mumbai's sprawling Dharavi enclave braces for the final flare of sunset, as Ramesh stands before a group of seamstresses, chai pot warming at his side. All afternoon, he dispensed ginger-infused tea to garment workers who stitched tirelessly under the buzz of kerosene lamps before dawn. As last light filters through corrugated iron roofs, he calls for a moment of rest, instructing the women to pause their machines and sip from chipped mugs that steam in the cooling air. They lean against weathered crates, eyes heavy but grateful, sharing stories of how their ancestors once rebuilt crumbled huts after cyclones under moonlight. Ramesh remembers how during his grandmother's youth, the rhythmic pounding of mortar and bricks carried through silent nights as neighbors banded together to reconstruct homes before sunrise summoned fresh labor. Now, as the distant call to prayer drifts across corrugated rooftops, he offers biscuits made from surplus dough, a simple acknowledgement that a moment's reprieve can replenish not only bodies, but spirits. When the sun finally disappears behind a haze of smog and memory, the women return to work, their fingers dancing against fabric as dusk's hush deepens into evening's pulse. Off the coast of Lima Paracha's National Reserve, Renzo and his marine biologists haul anchor in fading light, returning from dive sites where they collected water samples beneath swaying kelp forests. The reeds they cataloged this morning will inform conservation efforts protecting fragile sea lion breeding grounds. As the last rays of sun electrify crashing waves, he pilots the science vessel toward shore, where a small pier awaits, lit by a single lantern swinging on a post. Two local fishermen stand ready to assist, nodding at the crates of jars filled with data-laden water and tiny marine grazers. Renzo unloads carefully, recalling how Inca ancestors once navigated these same waters under the light of distant stars, their knowledge of tide and wind as precise as any digital readout. Tonight, as the crew gathers around a portable propane stove, steaming with a pot of quinoa soup, they discuss tomorrow's expeditions and reflect on how night's hush below the waves guided their hands just as ancestors' nocturnal wisdom guided first voyages. As twilight succumbs to a canopy of stars, Renzo lifts a mug in silent gratitude, a toast to the ocean's ancient rhythms and the promise of dawn's bright currents. In Mexico City's crowded boroughs, Elena packs yoga mats into the back of a borrowed van as dusk's rosy fingers stretch across the sky. She spent the late afternoon guiding trauma-informed yoga sessions for children. Soft breaths and gentle stretches echoing the prayerful movements of Aztec healers who once guided their people beneath temple shadows before sunrise. As nighttime edges closer, she drives through labyrinthine streets toward a low-slung community center wedged between pastel buildings. Inside, a group of working parents awaits an evening workshop on meditation and stress management, an antidote to the day's noise. Elena rolls out the mats beneath flickering fluorescent lights, and as participants settle into silence, she leads them through grounding exercises that recall centuries-old ritual practices. Each inhale draws in the warmth of dusk. Each exhale releases the tension accumulated under midday's demands. By the time the workshop ends, night has fully taken hold, and participants return to homes where oil lamps and prayer candles flicker whispers of solace in the dark, bridging ancestral wisdom to present-day resilience. In Paris's Latin Quarter, Jacques emerges from a cafe where he spent his late afternoon editing pamphlets and leaflets beneath the glow of stained glass windows and the soft hum of espresso machines. As dusk's auburn light spills onto cobblestones, he stakes out a small plaza lined with wrought iron chairs and ancient linden trees. A mismatched crew of artists, activists, and intellectuals gathers beneath the shifting shadows. Poets clutch notebooks. Students brandish petitions, and retired laborers adjust suspenders as they discuss tomorrow's march demanding greater social housing. Each carries a pamphlet Jacques slipped under their door during the day, verses of revolutionary verse inked under street lamps after curfew. As streetlights click on illuminating grand facades and graffiti-laced walls alike, Jacques cues a chorus of voices to read aloud. Their words reverberate through narrow passages, chasing away dusk's hush with rousing slogans. He watches as passers-by pause, some nodding in solidarity, others raising fists in silent concord. Tonight's gathering taps into a lineage that stretches back to medieval universities, where scholars debated radical ideas by candlelight, ensuring that collective discourse thrives when dawn finally arrives. High above the Seine, on a balcony overlooking the mist-wrapped Louvre, Clara emerges from her petit matin sleep that followed a night of painting allegorical murals under torchlight. The canvases, now dry, await an evening unveiling in a hidden gallery beneath vaulted stones. As the city's lights glitter on the river's surface like scattered pearls, she descends narrow stairways lined with centuries-old frescoes. The gallery's vaulted ceiling throbs with hushed anticipation. Art enthusiasts, critics, and curious tourists file in guided by the glow of handheld lanterns. Clara steps onto a small platform before her masterpiece, a panorama of intertwined figures representing modern refugees and medieval pilgrims, each brushstroke a testament to shared journeys across time. She recalls how artisans once chiseled stained glass by lamplight to teach biblical parables to nocturnal worshippers. Tonight, her painted narrative seeks to awaken hearts in a modern age, bridging dusk's hush with the clarion call of righteousness. As applause fills the chamber, she bows, aware that her nocturnal dedication has kindled a flicker of empathy destined to burn brighter when dawn's first light descends upon Paris. In Sydney's Blue Mountains, Marigold returns to the research station from a twilight hike among eucalypt-scented trails. Earlier, she recorded endangered lyrebirds' evening calls beneath recording microphones, capturing melodies that will guide conservation efforts. As the sky deepens into sapphire, she enters a small laboratory cocooned within mossy pines. A single lamp hums over a workstation crowded with notebooks and clay specimens. She examines nocturnal survey data, seismic readings, humidity logs, and bird call spectrograms, piecing together a narrative of ecosystem health that night alone could reveal. Marigold recalls how colonial naturalists once trailed possums by moonlight, sketching crude maps under the hush of forest gloom. Now, charting patterns under electric glow, she finds kinship with those early explorers, believing that insights gleaned in darkness can anchor tomorrow's stewardship. As midnight approaches, she drafts a report destined for environmental agencies, ensuring that dusk's mysteries translate into actions, fostering resilience long after daylight vanishes. In Lagos's labyrinthine Oshodi market, Kasim returns from an evening clinic where he administered vaccinations under the glare of battery-powered lanterns. The midday immunizations he coordinated now blend into tonight's data collection, each family registered, each dose recorded in a battered ledger. As dusk's heat yields to tropical breeze, he joins volunteers unpacking crates of oral rehydration salts and mosquito nets. They restock makeshift shelves beneath tarps that flap like restless wings in the night air. Children cluster at their edges, faces illuminated by flashlights, as they learn to coil nets above sleeping mats, echoing medieval midwives who draped cloths around cots to guard against night's terrors. Kasim recalls how his afternoon mapping of cholera outbreaks relied on modern statistics. Tonight, his efforts manifest in tangible shields against invisible threats. With every net hung and every volunteer trained, he knits a safety net woven of both data and compassion, ensuring that tomorrow's dawn greets a healthier community. In Barcelona's Gothic quarter, Isabella emerges from a twilight stroll along the Ramblas breadbasket, emptied of morning's focaccia and buñuelos. At dusk, she arrives at a communal kitchen tucked beneath ancient arches, smoke-stained walls, evoking the hearths where Moorish bakers once rose at dawn to feed hidden congregations. Tonight, Isabella kneads fresh dough for evening bread distribution, shaping loaves that will nourish homeless neighbors and migrant families waiting beneath lamplit alcoves. Each fold of dough echoes ancestral rituals, reminding her that the same hands that guided simple grains into sustenance by lamplight now shape relief for those left hungry at night's edge. As oven flames glow behind iron grates, she offers a ladleful of steaming lentil soup to waiting souls, bridging bread's warmth with fleeting comfort. In the hush before midnight, she reflects on how her everyday actions weave a tapestry linking sunrise's labor to twilight's compassion, ensuring that hunger finds no refuge under darkened sky. On the banks of the Seine, outside Notre Dame, Javier convenes an impromptu forum as twilight's lingering hues soften cathedral spires. He distributes maps tracing ancient Inca aqueducts and modern water rights proposals, documents he annotated beneath candle glow during last night's research vigil. Residents gather on stone benches, children in toe ears, eager for his guidance on sustainable irrigation in the face of shifting climate patterns. He recalls how Andean engineers once diverted river currents by moonlight, fashioning terraced fields that fed communities for centuries. Tonight, as he plots community gardens along fading riverbank light, he channels that ancestral ingenuity, believing that even in an urban labyrinth of steel and stone rivers still pulse with life awaiting stewardship. As midnight brushes the city's edges, he awards volunteers reflective vests and headlamps for early morning soil surveys, ensuring that knowledge harvested under darkness transforms into gardens blooming beneath tomorrow's bright sun. In Montreal's Plateau Mont-Royal, Nadine emerges from a midnight recording session, headphones still warm from layering protest harmonies meant to galvanize support for affordable housing. As the evening's final chords fade into the city's nocturnal lull, she carries wax-sealed vinyl discs to a gathering at an underground venue lit by neon signs and glowing candles. Attendees drift in union leaders with rolled-up banners, students clutching notebooks, artists brandishing spray cans for tomorrow's mural. Nadine distributes discs as though they were talismans, each groove bearing protest hymns composed under street lamp arcades. Tonight's event bridges the hush of creative night labor to the swelling chorus of midday activism to come. When she finally steps onto a cobblestone sidewalk, the northern sky shimmers with stray stars veiled by city light. She inhales the chill air, knowing that the seeds sown in this midnight assembly will sprout. As dawn's chorus, reaffirming that art birthed in darkness can still ignite change when bulbs glow under overhead wires. As dusk deepens into full night, these global custodians of purpose. Tenzin packing produce into Himalayan tea houses, Amma guiding midwives beneath baobab shade, Aki returning crab pots to longhouse fires, Sylvia slipping literacy pamphlets under Havana doors, Ramesh brewing chai in Mumbai's garment workshops, Renzo docking his research vessel in Lima, Paracas, Elena unrolling yoga mats in Mexico City courtyards, Jacques rallying voices in Paris's Latin Quarter, Clara unveiling murals beneath arched stone vaults, Marigold cataloging lyrebird calls in Australia's forests, Kasim restocking Lagos's evening clinic, Isabella feeding Barcelona's hungry beneath Gothic arches, Javier plotting irrigation by Seine's banks, and Nadine igniting protest hymns in Montreal's underground, they embody a shared continuum. Each of their evening tasks flows seamlessly from the labors of dawn, noon, and afternoon, weaving ancestral legacies into modern efforts. As night's velvet canopy unfurls across horizons, they stand vigilant, knowing that every flask of tea, every healing hand, every stroke of paint, every line of code, every bread loaf, and every chorus of protest echoes through time. In this unfolding tapestry of human dedication, darkness is not an end, but a fertile cradle, where purpose deepens and hope takes root, not only to survive the night, but to ensure that each dawn rises upon a world kinder, wiser, and infinitely more alive.